Another episode of Artisans of Steels. This is where, I try to talk to some of the most talented and creative people I know of in the knife making craft. Um, and the guest today is definitely one of those people. But before we get into that, I want to talk about our sponsors. We have Mr. Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Brewing. Sorry, my notes are kind of all over the place. Does that help if I block the camera? uh, Anchorage Brewing. He's on Instagram at Anchorage Brewing. They are brewers of some of the best beers I've ever had in my life. I was fortunate to also do a cool beer collaboration with Gabe, and he's got another beer coming out with my buddy Neil Kamimura, and it should be pretty tasty. So go check him out, Anchorage Brewing. Next is Tony Sasma at TNT Forge. Tony is a great he's a super talented maker. Sorry, it's early for me right now. He's super talented maker. He specializes in culinary knives. He gets incredible finishes on both his handles and his blades. He's got another batch he's working on actually right now, getting ready to put out. Go check him out on Instagram at TNT Forge. And then we have Mr. Brian Hinnekamp of Tortuga Blade Works. He's actually not far from me. He's just north of me a couple hours. He's been making some really great Sanmai little hunters and stuff. And I think he's playing too in some of the culinary, which is great to see. But he's a great follow. He does really, really great Sanmai blades, little hunters that are just perfect little everyday carries. So go check Brian out at Tortuga Blade Works on Instagram. Next is Mr. Josh Weston. Josh A. Weston on Instagram. He's also part of the Dragon Forge EXP over on Instagram. They've been touring around to various Renaissance fairs and festivals, and if they come to your area, you can go and forge with them. And at least go check out the forges because they are awesome. They've built them out to look like dragons, the fire breathing dragons. Again, so go check out Josh A. Weston on Instagram. All right, next is Michael Poor, Red Dragon Forge. Great guy, talented cook. I just saw actually recently he just ate his way through the hot ones. I think it's Heatness puts on the show Hot Ones or sponsors the show Hot Ones. And he just ate his way through the hot sauces. So I hope he's feeling all right after that. But he's a great guy. He's making some very cool stuff. Go check him out, Red Dragon Forge on Instagram. All right, next is Mr. Russell Tinsley. Ouzel Finch Beers. He's also his knife making handle is Can't Make Knives. But he's a great guy. The brewery makes incredible beers. I was fortunate enough that one of my students brought up some of the beer to a recent class in New Hampshire, and it was great to wrap my lips around some of the drinks again because they're super delicious. All right, next we have Maritime Knife Supply. Maritime Knife Supply, Mr. Lawrence Lake, based out of Atlanta, Canada. You can go find him on Instagram, Maritime Knife Supply at Maritime Knife Supply, also at maritimenifesupply.com. They have Lawrence has got all the stuff you need for making knives. He's got you set up from the simplest of handle accents and pins and tools up to anvils and hydraulic presses and grinders. I mean, he's got all the supplies. So go check him out. He's a great guy. He's worth supporting. Finally, we have Ben Butcher, Amo Bladesmithing on Instagram. He's a new sponsor, and he's based out of Portland, Oregon, not very far from me. And he seems to be a good guy. He's been fostering cats lately, which I know my guest today, Tom, will appreciate as he is petting a cat right now, I believe. And in the green room. That's not some weird euphemism. Anyways, let's get him in here. But go check out, before that, I just want to finish up with go check out Ben Butcher at Amo Bladesmithing. He's doing some great culinary knives. He did a really cool cut video recently. Obviously, the knives are very sharp. So go check him out. Go check out his work. And without further ado, we have Mr. Tom Ward. Now, real quick, Tom, Actually, I'm gonna pull him in here now. Pull you out of the green room.
Hello.
Hello. All right, Tom. I've been following Tom's work for quite some time now. I got started on my own as Maumasi Fire Arts back in 2013. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to actually start out with some images right away. This axe that I'm posting up here, I think you called it the Elven Battle Axe or War Axe.
Yeah.
How old is this piece? Because this is probably one of the earliest pieces I saw from you.
I think it's from around that time. I think it's from around 2013. It's probably about 9 years old at this point.
Wow.
It's my most stolen photo. It pops up on all of the Wazirabad.
Well,
the
it's
standing knife
beautiful
maker
piece.
Pages for sure.
Yeah, it's really easy to replicate something like that. So why wouldn't they? It's so silly.
Right, totally.
Yeah. But I've been following your work basically since I got started. And you were already doing really cool stuff. You obviously making Damascus and going to school at Mass Art, I believe it is or was. And
yeah.
But I think I don't know. I'll let you. Well, and I obviously have had you in the calendar. I actually had you in the calendar early because I've always really admired your eye for lines and the way you make your pieces is from the kind of perspective of being a sculptor. I feel like, and I don't know if you consider yourself a sculptor or craftsman or artisan or wherever in there, which is another reason I thought it'd be cool to have you on because you have more of that art background. And can I talk about this craft from more of that perspective? But how did any of this start? Like, how do you get into is it just from reading books? All of a sudden you're like, I want to jump in the fire. I mean, how far back as a kid was it when you first decided I want to make knives? No, I'm just joking. I'm sure it didn't start that far back.
Well, my dad says when I was a kid, I had a tendency to make little wooden weapons out in the yard. Like I'd grind sticks into points and stuff like that. So
I did the same thing.
Yeah. So he said it seemed natural when I told him I was going to start doing knives. And the way that I found knife making itself was actually kind of by accident.
Okay.
I went to art school in Boston, Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and I kind of got talked into being a product design major by my RA's boyfriend who was in the major. Okay. And I had the skills for it, like the right skill set for it. I could draw pretty well, and I could also do 3D pretty well, which is kind of like what that is. It's basically like prototyping all the time. Like you draw a million different profiles, and then you make a few of them and see how you feel, see how you like them. But when I was in the major, it became like very clear to me, like really early on, that I was making garbage, like just stuff for landfills, and it seemed like consumerism, like at a really disgusting level, and I couldn't. I was having a really hard time enjoying it.
Sure.
And then I took a woodworking class with in my first semester in that major, and I was like, this feels better. It feels more permanent, more tangible. And then when I was looking through the electives, or actually I had already been hanging around the metal shop at the school because they were doing these like performance iron pours, which were these like wild nights we'd have like once a semester. We would, like, a group of students would basically put on a show iron pour where we would have like a central courtyard in the school, and we would be in the center, and there'd be like local metal bands to the right, a barbecue, fire dancers and fire spinners, and then us pouring molten iron on stuff in the middle.
Right.
So it was like so wild and so much fun. I'd never seen anything like this before, and I knew I had to be involved in this. So I'd been hanging around the metal shop just to do this, and that's how I kind of found out about the bladesmithing class in J.D. Smith.
Okay.
Sorry, I had bronchitis earlier this week. I might cough a couple times, but
no worries.
more or less, I kind of like, then I snuck my way into his class because it was incredibly, so it was always full. So what I did was I basically like pretended that I was in the class for a couple weeks and got a project started. And then once I
I
started
love it.
the once I had the project started, he was like, "Ah, oh, fine, all right, I'll add you to the roster." And
That's a
and I
strong
ended up
move
making
there.
yeah. Well, I knew I had to try it, and I didn't really want to wait. I didn't want to like wait for next semester. I didn't want to waste any time. I knew I needed to give it a go.
Right.
So it was like I already had a chunk of steel. Like basically, he would start students off on the first week. Like the very first week, he would demonstrate. People with no blacksmithing experience, no understanding of knife making, no understanding of tool steels. He would demonstrate like forge welding day one.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and then the next week you'd all start. And basically the class was built so that you spent one semester making one project,
Oh
and he
cool.
just wanted it to be the best possible thing that you could make. He wanted you to understand how to work through an object and like deal with every single surface of it, like the plunges, the heels, the back. He didn't want any part of the object to look like you hadn't thought about it or attended to it or
Sure.
incorporated it into your design. So we would do some like prototyping, drawing ideation. Like if he would send you to like Jim Cooper's website and say, look at all the patterns, see what pattern you really like, and we can talk about how you're going to make it. Because obviously, he knows how to do just about everything, and you can kind of direct anybody into any pattern with a set of steps.
Sure.
Um, so my first semester, I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft at that point in time in my life, and I made this like big battle axe that was based off of something I really liked from that game. And after that, he was like, "Well, if you really enjoyed it, you can switch your major to sculpture, and you can do it all the time." Because the sculpture major at Mass Art was basically like you took electives and then you had studio time, and the studio time was just whatever you wanted.
Wow.
You made whatever art you wanted, or anything that was speaking to you, or anything that you had ideas about in any kind of medium. Could be everything from performance art to 2D collages and knives and 3D stuff, bronze, ironwork, whatever you felt like.
Wow.
So I did that, and I started getting into. So I started like kind of getting better or more into pattern welding and how to like make the knives. I knew nothing. And JD has kind of like I like this teaching method, by the way. It's like he gives you a vague set of directions
Okay.
and tells you to go try it.
Sure.
And then when you go do it and you come up with problems, and he goes, okay, so this is how you solve that. Or if you get stuck on something, he wants to see you like kind of go for it first and see if you can
Sure.
puzzle it out on your own, because I think the knowledge sticks with you better.
Right.
Like you had to kind of earn it in a small way. So you got like, okay, so like the milling machine, for instance, like how do I mill a slot in something on the milling machine? He's like, well, you put one of these bits in here and then you make it go through. And you go, and you're like, okay, but what does that mean?
Put
And he'd
one
do
of
like
these
a
bits
quick,
on there and make it go
yeah,
through.
yeah, and he'd like give you kind of a quick demo on how the machine worked and like how things were going on. And he's like, okay, try it, you do it, come back and tell me how you felt about it. And I said, well, like this happened, or like I feel like this should be better, or I didn't get this part of it, I don't understand what's going on here. And he'd be like, oh, okay, so this is what that is, and this is what that is, and this is how you solve this problem.
Right.
And then next time you can come back and tackle it a different way, or better, or more efficiently. So I had basically 3 years of that. And then I graduated from there. And I kind of was able to keep using the shop at the university for a limited amount of time to make some work on when no classes were going on. And
Sure.
I was pretty friendly with the other professors and the guy who ran the shop, so they didn't mind me coming in and doing some work
Okay,
there
yeah.
while I still lived in Boston. But I had like lots of like construction jobs and stuff like that just to pay the bills and make ends meet.
Sure.
I did like ornamental plaster, art handling, and then I got I did a from there I had applied like pretty much right when I graduated to get for a Fulbright research grant to go to
Really?
Sweden. Yeah, and my initial plan was actually to work at Gränsfors Bruks Axe Works to learn how to make their like. I was going to basically like I was going to spend a little time on their production line. They have like these big kind of like how what's his name, Liam Hoffman has like a big production forging press with a bunch of steps in
With
it, and you just put the
multiple,
steel
yeah.
through
It's
all.
got, yeah. I've seen those.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
pretty crazy. That's so
So
cool.
yeah, so like yeah, so work on that, and then I could after I got okay with that, then they were going to let me do sort of my own stuff and research things. But then what ended up happening was it was a really long time between applying for the grant and actually getting it. It was like a year.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and there'd been some change in management at the company, and who I'd set the whole thing up with no longer worked there. And to the best of my
Oh,
ability,
perfect.
my knowledge, I could. Yeah, exactly. To the best, yeah. So to the best of my knowledge, I don't know really what happened, but it seemed like there was some bad blood between the guy who left and the people who were there. So they
Oh,
basically
wow.
told me no. But I had the grant, and now I had nowhere to go. Um,
Wait,
and I
that's that doesn't make sense. So
uh,
you still get to keep your award, but they wouldn't work with you and figure out how to
right. Well,
you make use of it?
right. Well, basically, like the way that it works is you have to have a host.
I
So
see.
now I had the grant but no host, so I couldn't at that point in time I couldn't make means to go. And I talked to the grant committee, and they were like, "Well, if you can find something else to do, we'll say in like the broad scheme of historic metalwork, uh, you can still come and we'll figure it out." And so I think I emailed like every school and craftsperson in like the whole country
Oh,
and
wow.
heard like nothing. And keep in mind, this is like I think it's like 2012, so like internet presence wasn't really big yet. Like there was no YouTube monetization yet. Like there wasn't like
Sure.
YouTube tutorials for anything. People weren't
Right.
like Instagram was brand new. People hadn't monetized Instagram yet. So like digital presence for schools, workshops, and stuff like that was still pretty low. Um, sorry, my cats.
You're good. Cats are good.
um, he and then this museum in the center of Stockholm got back to me like right at the deadline that I needed to like find something to do before they were going to tell me, okay, we're going to give it to somebody else.
Right.
And it was for the Vasa Museum in Stockholm. And that museum, it houses a 17th century warship that they pulled off the harbor floor and put back together.
Crazy.
And my my boss says, or my who's going to be ended up being my boss, this guy from Virginia, Fred Hawker. I have a project for you, but it may be a bit bigger than anything you've done before. And it was a three-ton bronze cannon.
Okay.
Um,
I saw a picture of that on your website.
yeah. So I had to basically figure out how to cast a new one from based on the originals that would be like functionally identical to the originals to do ballistic testing with, because they wanted to like model the ship's like war capacity on the
Crazy.
computer. Yeah. So that took about a year and a half to get through that project, and I lived in Sweden. I met Anders Hogstrom while I was there
Oh,
and hung
cool.
out with him a little bit. Um, And that all worked out fine, more or less. It was a long time, little education in Swedish bureaucracy,
Okay.
and understanding why social systems are important for the well-being of a society.
Sure.
And then I came back. I actually ended up moving in with Zach Jonas,
Okay.
and I lived with him for about a year and a half, and I was a full-time knife maker for about a year and a half. And then I got a job in New York City doing architectural work because I needed some more money coming in. I moved down to Brooklyn, and I was there for 3 years.
And Zach is another student of JD's. Were you guys taking
Yes,
courses at the same time?
yes, we actually started at the same time. We both
Oh,
started
nice.
around 2007 or 8, I think.
Okay.
And Zach might have started a little bit before me, but we were hanging out. I went to his wedding. That's how we became friends.
Right.
And then Andrew Mears was maybe 4 years before me, and then
Okay.
Kevin Klein was maybe 3 years after me.
Okay.
So we're kind of like the ones who made it out into knife making.
The Four Horsemen.
Yeah. JD's dark horses.
Yeah. Exactly what you are.
And then I went to, after about 3 years of that job, I kind of got sick of it, and I applied for graduate school at SIU Carbondale's blacksmithing
Oh,
program.
I just realized that when you were in Brooklyn, that's when is that when I met you for the first time, or did I meet you at Blade Show for the first time?
I think we met at Blade Show the first time, but
Okay.
we hung out in Brooklyn for Fortune Fire because that's when they were still filming it in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you were living there, and I had just gotten done. Yeah. Right. And we went to that bar where I showed you your guy, the bartender friend of yours, had a hone a knife on the bottom of a
Yeah.
coffee cup. Oh, and I brought those,
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
and I had those cookies, but they weren't special cookies.
Yes.
They're just, I mean, they were delicious cookies, but they weren't like green cookies.
No. They were quality cookies, but they didn't. But they were. They weren't getting you anywhere different.
No journey seeking here.
No.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So then you start making your way over to Carbondale, and can you kind of explain? I only recently learned about Carbondale, and I don't know
Hmm.
anything, but I still only know kind of like a very superficial level of understanding of what
Okay.
Carbondale is, but I hear it referred to often.
Okay. So it's the only Masters in Fine Art blacksmithing program in America. And it was founded in, I think, the late 1970s by a few. His name escapes me right now. It's really bad, but a very famous studio craft blacksmith. And he basically, at this point in time, you say in the American contemporary art scene, there was a return to craft arts that happened in the 1970s. So ceramics, glass, metalworking got put into this, and it's also about the same time that knife making kind of like became new again.
Sure.
These guys all in this program were mostly like artist blacksmiths. They made sculptural work, but some of the really big names in early pattern welding ideology and that sort of stuff came from SIU Carbondale. Daryl Meyer was one of the first graduates there,
Oh,
and
wow.
he's ultra. I mean, he still lives in the area. That was one of the nice things in Carbondale. I got to hang out and talk with him a lot and pick his
Oh,
brain about
cool.
pattern welding and have some nice conversations with him about knives and craft and ideas and what you can do with
Sure.
it. And the other guy, his name is Phil Baldwin, is a graduate of SIU Carbondale, Shining Wave Metals.
Sure.
He makes all the mokame for Rio Grande, and he was the one he was the first person in America to bring the mokame process back from Japan.
Oh, wow.
And he's like a insane wealth of knowledge. He came and visited SIU one semester, and he taught for a couple weeks while our professor was out of town.
Sure.
Really crazy guy, really fun, tons of, like I said, just an absolute wealth of knowledge and intuition about blacksmithing. So the program itself is interesting because it's a 3-year program which is for masters are usually 2. And it's fully funded, which means you work at the university and you don't have to pay tuition. You just pay the fees, the course fees, and you get paid every month for how much you work. So it's a
Huh.
fairly cost effective way to do a graduate school, especially in art. I mean, I know like a couple people who did their graduate programs at like Pratt University in Brooklyn and came out with like $120,000 more in debt, and I was like, this is just not that's not
Yikes.
feasible for me.
Sure.
um, yeah, so that was a good way for me, and also because I mean it's the only program, so it's the only place you can really go. Yeah, if you
That's
want
cool
to
that
do blacksmithing.
Carbondale
Yeah,
has that model. Do
yeah.
the it's not that school isn't just for blacksmithing though, is it? Or is it pretty
Uh,
focused?
well, the program itself is focused on blacksmithing, and there's also a jewelry making component
Okay.
as well. Like in the metal, it's just like the overarching thing is the metals department, and it
I see.
has a professor in jewelry, this woman Sun Young Kim, and she's really talented. She does all this work in silver wire work and kumbu gold overlays and stuff like that. And then
Mm.
the other professor for the blacksmithing department is Rick Smith, who's a very famous artist blacksmith. And he also, in the 1980s, was doing some pretty revolutionary pattern welding stuff. Like he was doing mosaics of arcade games. Yeah. like
With
using
he was
like
like doing powder?
no, like using like square rods to make like pixel screens and stuff like that.
Oh,
And like
wow.
yeah, and like
That's crazy.
and for some reason he just sort of I don't know, like I mean the way he describes it is he just kind of got bored with it and like
Okay.
moved on, even though he was like doing this wicked revolutionary stuff for like 1987, 1988, and he was just like and
Interesting.
kind of yeah, kind of moved on with it, and he makes like very interesting vessels and stuff like that, and he does these big like raised steel forms, repousse and raised steel, um,
Okay.
like wall sculptures and stuff like that.
Right.
Um, and that worked for him more, I guess. But he's was also very I mean he was very supportive of knife making and pattern welding as well, because in the um, I guess you would say like the fine art world like there's a weird separation between craft and fine art that is sometimes difficult to navigate in these spaces.
Sure.
We can talk about that more if you want at some point, but for the I guess right now. But yeah, the so that program was 3 years. I graduated in 2020 at the height of COVID, and
Perfect.
yeah, perfect timing. But my thesis was basically on the history of pattern welding and crucible steel and weapons production.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I remember I was living in Connecticut at the time and you and Peter
yeah,
would chat a lot.
yeah, yeah,
From
yeah,
time to time at least. Yeah.
yeah. Because I bought some steel from him to use for a few of the pieces there.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I feel like your work has a lot of influence uh, from the Middle East and India,
Hmm.
as well as some European stuff. And
Hmm.
I guess what is about those different styles that you're attracted to? I mean, I think you use them in great ways. I'm just, everybody's kind of got their genre that they're interested in, and what is it that most
Hmm.
attract you to that than others? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I started like that's my main historic interest when I first started was like Viking stuff. Um, and then I did a little bit of that, and I kind of like I don't know. I just kind of, in the same way, I just kind of got a little bored with it,
Okay.
and then I went actually. on my honeymoon, we went to Istanbul, where I'm living now,
Okay.
and I saw like just these incredible pieces of art that I like had just all these like flowing, sinuous lines and
Right.
like gorgeous like cross section transitions, and like they were just so beyond just being a knife or just being a
For sure.
sword. Um, and that ended up being really attractive to me because in my compositions, I really like flowing lines. I really like
Right.
things that take you around the object, and the this kind of genre of knives, without being fantasy knives, had all of these kind of
Right.
qualities, aesthetic qualities that I really enjoyed. And now that I've made a lot of it, I've found that it like really works with kind of like the aesthetics that I enjoy. Um,
What talking about fantasy knives, what do you think defines a fantasy knife? Because right now, like off the top of my head, I'm like something that's actually functional versus something that's not. And even seeing some work can be extremely embellished, even historically speaking, doesn't necessarily mean that it's not functional. And I feel
right.
like often people will, for pieces that are highly embellished, will say, "Oh, that's just this fantasy piece." But if I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's got to
Well,
be a level of functionality that goes with it too.
I think like to me, I mean, obviously the word fantasy tends to be used like derogatorily towards
Sure.
work. But I think we're really all making fantasy work kind of in a
Right.
certain sense, because like there were no like mosaic Damascus steel bowies in the American West with mammoth ivory handles and full file work around the whole thing and engraving
Yeah.
on everything. So
Yes, there were. Don't you dare do that.
exactly, exactly. So I mean, that's our American fantasy in that sense. So like we do all of these things. I think when people say fantasy knife, I think maybe in my mind I see like mall ninja shit, like
Okay, yeah, sure.
something that's got like 18 different spikes on it, and it's made out of like some unknown grade of stainless steel, and it has no there's nothing real about it. Like it has no cultural connection to anything.
Sure.
It's just some sort of like wacky steel object. Um,
Right.
but I do think like when you're talking about art, people kind of get too like hyped up over this like word fantasy, because like everything that we're making today is a fantasy. Like it all comes from your mind. It all comes from the ideas that you have in your head. And we're all making things that never existed before. Like mosaic, Damascus, integral, chef's knives are like in that sense are fantasy knives because they didn't exist
Sure.
ever. That's a new thing. We invented this, and it came from our imagination. So that's our fantasy of what we think the ideal chef's knife is.
Definitely.
Versus like like if someone wants to, I think when someone uses that word fantasy in this derogatory sense, it's kind of like very limiting. They're
Sure.
coming at it from a very limited perspective.
Right.
And this conversation happens in like art school as well,
Mm.
because like you'd have this thing. It's like, oh, it's just a fantasy object. It's like, yeah, but all your sculptures are fantasy objects too. Like just because this thing
Right.
has an edge on it doesn't mean that it's more of a fantasy than your fantasy about what twisted bars of steel look like. I don't
Yeah.
know. uh, it's a very like broad uh, category of definitions, I think.
Sure. Um, a few I can't remember how many years it's been now. But you got your JS. How was that
Yeah.
leading up to that? Um, leading up to doing all that, and I've had a few friends now go
Uh,
through the testing. But I'd love to hear it from you directly to talk
uh,
about what it was like leading up to that and preparing for it, and for anybody that might be potentially thinking of walking that path.
yeah, I think it's a good thing. I know there's like a lot of complaints about like the test is too like limited, but that's kind of the point of a test. Um, and for me, I was working at that architectural job, and I think I did it in 2016. Is when I
Okay.
did my JS, and I was working full time at this architectural metalworking shop doing like high end interior stuff. And my boss was like kind enough to let me stay. He gave me a key and I could stay after hours and work on my own work. So for about, I don't know, 6 months straight, I was putting in like between like 40 to like, or maybe like 30 to 40 extra hours a week just staying at night and on weekends, like working on the
Holy
knives.
smokes.
And I
Jesus.
made,
Yeah.
I had like one set. I must have spent 2 months working on these knives, and I got to heat treating them, and something was off about the steel, and they wouldn't harden. So I had like spent, I forged them all, I ground them all, I rough ground them all. I'm working on these like extra. I'm doing this all on my own time. So I work, and then they just like I couldn't get them to harden at all. And I didn't know what it was. I went up to Zach's, I used his salts, nothing worked. So I had to scrap them all and start over. And I did that. And again, so I'm just like working on my own time. And I had my performance test because Fortune Fire was still being shot in Brooklyn, and it was when Jason Knight was involved. He was
Right.
hanging around Brooklyn a lot, and it was like a Saturday night, like 8 o'clock. He was hanging out with this other knife maker who lives in Brooklyn, Theo Naz.
Okay. Yeah.
And I called up Theo and I was just like, "Hey, is Jason with you?" And he's like, "Yeah, he is actually. Does he want to proctor a JS test right now?" And like we met up at another metal shop, and I did it at like 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday in Brooklyn, just because I wanted to like get it out of the way. Like I had just finished, and I was like, let's just do this and see if we have a meltdown here or not. If I need to bother with the rest of these knives, and
Sure.
so I did that. I just kind of continued plugging away at it. I got Jason to look at my knives. I got Joe Selaski to look at my knives because he's in upstate New York, and they all gave me these should pass,
Right.
kind of thing. And I think
I got your set
like
right
here. Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. And I went to Blade that summer, and I'd say actually like I felt pretty good about them until I put them down on the table in that room.
Oh. You set
The
it down and
light.
you're like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
Yeah. I could see like the light in that room is so harsh. It's like a super, super hard white LED light, and like you just see everything that you missed.
Oh,
So
wow.
like I was like, oh my God, there's some like hiccups on the top of that clip, and there's like some hooks here and there, and like the
Oh
odd
no.
like last grit scratch. Like they weren't perfect by any means, but also it's a journeyman, so it's not like
Right.
so imperative. Like you're just supposed to be demonstrating what the ABS decides is like the basic set of skills.
Sure.
And but I ended up passing. I got 6 out of 7 passes. Steve, waiting outside that room for that hour, man, that's brutal. Like amount of stress to like put yourself up for that sort of judgment. But at the end of the day, I think it's a good test.
Sure. Okay.
It's a lot of people like comment that it's like a very limited test and it's flawed in a lot of ways, and they're maybe not wrong.
Okay.
But to establish just some like basic guidelines of like
Sure.
what is appropriate fit and finish, and like what are like the appropriate like, okay, so like your handles should be symmetrical. This seems basic, but a lot of people can't do it.
Sure.
Like your blade should be in line with your handle, and then like, oh, you should have your plunges should be equal. Like your satin finishes should be clean. Like this is it kind of like, it's like one of those things that you sort of like, it sort of goes without saying, but a lot of people don't know, or they don't have guidance. And
Mm,
it's a big difference when you go through making those knives. And also because you have kind of a limited canvas, because you can't use Damascus. They want you to use very basic materials for the whole thing so that they can
right.
see you can't like hide
Right.
anything. And they want the knives, you know, they want to see you like do like, oh, a hidden tang and a full tang, and you can't do all integrals. You have to do some knives that are bigger and some that are smaller, so that they can see like a variety of,
Yeah.
of skills
Of
on your
skills. Right.
knives.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's some other things where like it can kind of come down also. Sometimes I've heard and witnessed to like who's in the judging room, because it
Mm.
also then comes down to some personal preferences and stuff like that. But yeah, those things
Sure.
you can't really like account for.
Right.
You can only use the guidelines you're given and hope for the best.
Right.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, also though, everyone there at the ABS is there to maintain a certain level of craft for the community and educate people on how to make the best thing possible.
Sure.
And obviously there are, you know, like what have you arguments over, you know, like who says that this is the best way possible, yada yada yada. It doesn't really matter to me. I think that it's like as long as there's someone there setting some sort of guidelines for people to follow, then this is good.
Right.
Versus
Yeah.
it just being like a free for all.
A free for right. How
Yeah.
are you planning on continuing to move forward and try to accomplish a mastersmith someday?
Yeah, I'm eligible now. I've been 3 years have, or more than 3 years have lapsed since I've done my JS, but I haven't had time for it. I had originally maybe planned to make it part of my master's thesis, but I like with COVID and everything, it just didn't pan out.
I see.
And here the shop in Turkey has just kind of become functional this summer. It took us about a year to get it set up, and right now kind of like the work that I can make most reliably is integrals, but we'll be
Sure.
adding some equipment soon so I can make some more advanced stuff. And so maybe in the next year I'd like to do it just to get it done.
I mean, you
Yeah,
definitely have the skills. Like I said, I've been admiring your work for a long time. I want to kind of pop through some pictures of some of your
sure.
work. So I showed this earlier. Oh wait, no, not that one earlier. I showed this one earlier. But I love these axes that you make. They have like the I mean, they would be super functional as weapons, but they're also very like the lines like you were talking about before. Like the way the lines flow and
Mm,
come together and meet and flow into other parts is really great.
thank
Um
you.
yeah, I love this piece a lot. Is this trying to think what are the material well the materials Damascus. I
Yeah,
can't tell if it's
the
reversing
the
twists or
I think it was yeah, multi-bar twist. I think actually that piece was a leftover from another project that I was
oh
doing. It
nice.
might have been, yeah, it was like the offcut of a sword, I think. And then I was like, I wonder if this thing could be an axe. And I like was like trying to drift a hole in it, and it just kind of like got really funky. And I was like, all right, I'll just go with it. Sometimes I like when I'm working with these, I like to maybe let the steel kind of decide what it wants to be, if
Okay.
that makes sense. Sometimes I have like really elaborate plans if I have like a really specific thing in mind that I need to make or accomplish. And sometimes if I'll just like have a bar of steel and be like, I can make something out of this, and I'll
Right.
just kind of start and I'll uh, kind of like freehand it until I get to somewhere that I'm happy with. Um, and that this was one of those pieces. I think I just sort of was like, I want to make one of those like armor piercing spike axes thing that is like from like they have them. in India, and they have them in
So
like
gnarly, dude.
yeah, yeah, and it was I think in the Native American cultures, they have kind of like a similar sort of like spike tomahawk kind of thing, and
Okay.
it's sort of like a mishmash of those ideas.
Yeah. I only just noticed that looking at it in the with the full handle and the profile of the blade, it looks
Uh-huh.
like it looks like a bone handle was attached to a knife. I never realized how much of a knife profile it had before, because I always looked at it just as an overall composition. I love the way
Mhm.
that the handle is sculpted too, to have this kind of like aged, weathered bone kind of look to it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Uh,
It's super
I
sweet.
did that. I did that just with like gel antique leather stuff. The handle is ash,
Okay.
but there's like a gel antiquing. It's like a leather working thing that turns the leather kind of like modelly brown. And I was just like, I wonder if that works on wood. And I just went for it. And I kind of was like, oh wow, you can actually
Oh
do
wow,
some pretty cool stuff with this, with just the wood. Yeah.
that's great. This is another piece that is really crazy, but I think it has a lot of really cool stuff going on there. I've never seen anybody do that to a blade, and I got a closer up look. You can kind of see better. But you want to talk about this piece?
Mhm. I made it for a tattoo artist in Boston. He wanted like he was his heritage was from Mexico, and he wanted something kind of like fun and unique for that. So of course I just started like digging through Aztec deities and seeing what I could
Mm,
kind of like what kind of fun I could have with that.
yeah.
And I found this it was like the god of sacrificial knives. Um, and it was like this woman who was like very beautiful but had a skeleton, like a skull for a head, but like a naked woman's body with like bone bat wings. And I was like, this is like the craziest description of a deity I've ever heard. And it was like,
Yeah.
it's gotta be uh and I was like, all right, but like how do you match that kind of with the now? And like I mean, obviously in like the machete is kind of like the Latin
Right.
America kind of like go-to utility everything. So I thought like making an obsidian looking machete would be
Right.
really fun.
And that
And
was
it's
I was
just
gonna say that. It does have that appearance of being like flint knapped.
yeah, and I just do it. I did it all in a round wheel, and like as I was playing with it, just kind of like I found like the more haphazard I was with it, the better it looked. Like the kind of like more I didn't really think about it. I just like pressed the steel into the wheel and went somewhere else and didn't think about it. And like to establish all these facets
Right.
is like as it got kind of like more random and chaotic, it looked the best. Um,
Sure. Oh, that's
and then
cool.
I
I
kind of
really
I did
sorry, go ahead.
oh sorry I did it I chose like just kind of like a high layer random steel because I was if I remember rightly I just kind of wanted like the shimmer and I wanted the I knew I was going to be like kind of cutting across the cross section like very aggressively, so I thought that that would
Right.
be the
No, it's
most
great.
interesting.
It reminds me of compression curls that you see sometimes in, especially in like koa, or
Mm,
maple, like quilting in a way.
yeah.
It's so cool. This next piece is a spear. I actually got to see this. I feel lucky I got to see this. At Blade Show 2019, I believe. That was the last Blade Show I
Yeah,
was at. Maybe
yeah,
2018.
and it won best of the rest in that show.
Right. It's
Um,
such an insane piece. Um, what was the inspiration for how like it's got this separate kind of tine that comes off the back of the spear point. Can you kind of describe this piece and like how you decided?
yeah,
I mean, I guess it kind of
I
mimics
mean,
some of the lines you see in the antler.
kind of like I mean, it started. This piece kind of like evolved over a bunch of years because I started it at Zach's place, and then I moved to New York, and I didn't work on it at all, and then it kind of stuck with me, and it kind of just was like hanging around until I got to Carbondale, and I kind of was like, oh, I have kind of like, what am I going to do with this thing? I felt like I had sort of like boxed myself into a corner with the socket and the facets, and I wasn't sure. I was like, well, maybe I should just like the rest of it should all just be super organic, and I can maybe figure out how to make that all transition. And then I had seen there was another student who was working there who was making these like really organic forged forms
Mm.
that had a lot of dynamism to them. And I was like, well, what if this thing had like a super dynamic stand? Like, what if it was like kind of placed in this like thrown motion?
Cool.
Um, and so that the stand kind of evolved out of that. I tried it a few different ways to kind of get this form that looked like it was kind of like pushing with the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then to the handle was just one antler of I think it's not an ibex, but it's something similar that I found on eBay. I think it's like 3 feet long. And to me, that just sort of like mimicked the sort of like waveform on the bottom of the stand. And it looked like it was just sort of something that was like in motion. So I was able to kind of like craft this little piece of wood that socketed to the socket on the forged or the hole on the forged socket pretty well, and then kind of blend that into the antler. I dyed the whole thing black and went with that. And the antler is it's raw. I think the only thing I did to the antler was I buffed it.
Oh wow.
And the whole thing, the composition ended up being really fun. Just like it's more about that kind of like at the end of it, it's kind of more about that thrown motion, like the motion of the object.
No, it's great.
Than it is really about the object itself. Because the object itself is actually quite flawed. Like there's a few errors in the socket. There's a few places where things like went through. So it could really only be a sculpture at that point. Like I was never going to think about it as like a functional object anymore.
Yeah, the movement's really cool. If I remember correct, because I'm looking at the photograph, and anybody watching the video can see, like it might be easy to mistake it for not being very big, but this thing was like what, like 5 feet long?
I think it's like 7 feet long.
7 feet long. I was way off. Way off. Yeah.
It comes apart too. So I could like transport it, like the antler comes off because trying to like get through security or box things up with something that's 7 feet long, like it's a problem that I've encountered quite frequently. I really like making big stuff, but it's really hard to ship it. It's really hard to move it. Like I totally get why guys only make folding knives, because you can just like the case. It's like, boop. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that piece is really cool. Yeah, and I've seen you do some really large pieces too. I was actually, I forgot to grab. Oh wait, this isn't one of the axes I was thinking of just now, but I would love to hear about this axe because you got a lot of stuff going on in this pattern, and it looks small on the screen right now, but when people watch this later, they'll be able to see some of this detail a bit better. But
yeah, it's the handle on that one is about 5.5 feet tall, so and the blade is almost a foot long, so it's a really menacing battle axe. And one of the fell in love with, like really early on, was the Danax. These really big, broad, like massive forgings. And I always found them to be really elegant. The lines are really interesting. They're really purpose-built pieces. And then again, when I went to Istanbul in the Hagia Sophia, it's basically an ancient church for those who don't know. It's was formerly Christian Orthodox church made by Justinian I, who was the Byzantine emperor of what formerly Constantinople, now Istanbul. And up in the balcony, there is Viking runes carved into the balustrade. And they don't say anything important. It says just as like I think it says Halfdan was here. And which is really funny, mostly to have, because what ended up happening was the Rus Vikings, who ended up becoming Russians later, but were that Scandinavian like Viking kind of people in the beginning, were traveling from the rivers from basically the St. Petersburg region all the way to the Black Sea and Constantinople. And because they were these huge menacing dudes, they ended up getting employed by the Byzantine royal guard as something called the Varangian Guard. And so
Okay.
the Byzantine emperor had Viking bodyguards. Like,
Sure.
so you imagine that they're like these like badass Scandinavian dudes are like hanging around ancient Istanbul, and like they just have to like sit there and do guard duty, and they're in one of the most impressive like pieces of architecture that's ever been built, and this guy is just like dragging a knife into the canister. Like,
Halfdan was here.
yeah, and then like I said before, like my first kind of historical interest in knife making was in kind of like Viking, Scandinavian, Germanic stuff. And so this piece was part of my master's thesis, and I thought like to
Oh, cool.
include something that kind of mated both of those worlds together was really interesting to me.
Sure.
And then so this piece, it's a 4-bar composite, and then the body is wrought iron that I got from Daryl Meyer. And I learned how to forge this kind of, or the kind of the basic idea on how to forge this style of axe I got from James Austin, who came and did a demonstration my first semester in grad school. And he sort of like walked us through the basics of Viking, like this is called an asymmetrical wrap Viking axe. So when you make the preform for forging the eye, it's like it's offset, so they don't meet at an exact spot. It kind of comes together like this, and the forge weld sort of ends on the outside, and then you sort of preset where your edge is going to be on the other side of the billet. So
Interesting.
I got this really nice, and I did a bunch of them after he came. I was like, I made a bunch more of them because I really enjoyed the form. It's like something that I really enjoy in making axes and blacksmithing in general is actually this like plastic movement of material. Like
Sure.
in knife making, we kind of have like we use a very small set of the blacksmithing skill set. We make square bars flatter and longer and rectangular. Like everything is making square bars square again. And to make axes, you need to like use a lot more of this like plastic knowledge and differentiation of like materials and process steps and tooling and things like that to achieve these shapes. So the whole eye is forged to shape. Very little material was removed, and actually that outside surface is a raw forged surface that I
That's great.
just like basically sandblasted and etched. Um, and then the blade, the two kind of chevron blades was I don't know if anybody has like come up with this in a different way, but it's sort of a way that I developed to get straight chevron patterns, and then I just sort of like I used like a lap joint to get them to meet in the middle
You're giving
because I
away some
thought
secrets.
oh, a little bit, yeah. I mean, I can talk about that pattern. It's actually quite simple.
Your call.
Yeah. And then the Zangier pattern, which is like pattern that is prevalent on Persian gun barrels from like the 14th and 15th century, and in modern times, very few people have accomplished it. Salem Strab helped me actually a lot coming up, because he sort of in the last couple of years, he was sort of the first person to like reassess this pattern, and he shared a little bit of his tooling with me, and I was able to kind of like from that extrapolate how to get this pattern to work. And it's quite it's very simple but very complicated at the same time, because you have to do a lot of things very, very precisely, and if the precision isn't there, then the whole pattern is fucked. So
Right. Well, and you got the houndstooth activity going along the edge too, which you
right, and
haven't gotten into yet.
yeah, and that's pretty simple. I mean, that's you just need a pressed eye, basically, like, and then one side. You can, I assume you could do both sides with tool steel if you wanted to, but this one is wrought iron and like 20 layers. So you have a die that has the teeth in it, and there are some like Justin Mercier once told me that people always get it wrong, in that one side has teeth and one side is flat. So I wanted to like make sure it looked fairly authentic according to what Justin said. He always seemed to be he always kind of like had the stickler for it when people did it. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it the way that Justin told me. It pans out. So like if you look in the teeth of that are like towards the edge, those ones are pointy, and then the mounds are kind of flattish on the top.
They're more rounded.
So yeah. So I wanted the teeth to kind of be like pointing at the edge, like, where it bites, I guess.
Right.
And then to me also, like this piece in like representing this sort of like mix of cultures, basically like Vikings sitting in the Near East. Right. Like the geometric patterns and the Persian patterns kind of on the axe, like maybe they would have seen that on some pieces there. It was like, I would need to get an axe that looks like that, man. That looks cool. Like hanging out there for, a couple generations. And then, yeah, and that's kind of it. But
is this the style? Because for a while, and maybe that's what you were referencing before, but you were doing, so typically like a traditional axe would have in the body of the head, it would have a hot cut and then a high carbon bit well inserted, but you were doing something that was basically the opposite, where you would insert the body of the axe into the Damascus, which I thought was really cool, and added like a topographical or kind of textural aspect to the pieces that was really, get this off our faces, but that I thought was really interesting. And I don't know if you did it exactly with that piece.
Yeah, I did it as an overlay there. I actually like looked this up. I couldn't think if I had the idea or if somebody else had the idea. I don't exactly know where it came from, but I was looking at some historic pieces, and the historic Dane axes also have this kind of feature where the edge kind of comes up and then it dips down into the body of the axe.
Interesting.
And they have some cross-sectional cuts of it, and it looked like it was overlaid to me.
Right.
So I was like, well, there's no reason that you can't overlay that as well. Like, why wouldn't I give that a shot? It's the same work, it's just reversed.
Right. I mean, but it's a little trickier with the pattern stuff, because you intentionally kept that step, and to preserve that, you have to be pretty precise about how far you're gonna reduce things down once you start welding them, and where you're hitting exactly, because I feel like it would be really easy to mess it up.
Oh, for sure. I had to be really, really careful about like how far down I was going to forge it. It was that forge welding was all done by hand. I didn't do it under the hammer or anything like that, because I just needed to make sure that basically everything just fused. I didn't want to reduce the cross section at all. I just wanted it to be stuck.
I gotcha.
So, and everything is preformed like basically to the size. So the blade, like it's not like a flat butt weld kind of thing. It was like that surface was curved and the blade bit was also curved and it was welded curved so that it wouldn't, I wouldn't have to forge it that much in the After Effects to get to where I wanted.
I got you.
Yeah.
See, and that's something for a while I used to chase. I was chasing, and I feel like maybe I've talked about this on the podcast before. Everybody listening, so sorry, I'm gonna repeat it. But there's at a certain point you have to. A lot of people, I feel like a lot of people are like, forge everything. You gotta forge everything. But at a certain point, you have to have the creative foresight, I guess, to decide when not to forge it like really close to shape and stuff like that. So that you are preserving shapes and lines and contours and textures and stuff like that, that you really want to be represented in the final piece.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's really cool that
I mean, I think that
you took the step and you had that foresight to kind of think about that.
Right. Well, I mean, that's totally true. And I think like in this sense, pattern welding, when you really are kind of like getting really involved in it and you are starting to know like how patterns should ideally present before you've even like started forging it. Because like say, you know, like a multi-bar twist or something like that, the most interesting stuff is like 30% into the bar and deeper. So you don't want to forge it. You don't want to forge your bevels in. You don't want to forge your things in because you're forcing that pattern farther into the center of the bar and you're not going to get it. So you need to have some restraint times depending on what pattern you're going to go for in terms of like, or what look you're trying to establish. Like if you just want, like if you're doing a twist counter twist thing and you just want the kind of zigzag chevron thing, then sure, forge it really close to shape so you can like push that pattern into the center, like the stars and stuff into the center. But if you want to get the activity from the stars and the like the drags from the side of the bar, then you need to leave it thick and then just like hog it all off, which is also like you're like, oh shit, I'm wasting so much metal, but like
but holy smokes, what's hidden on the inside is
exactly
is worth it. I don't know, I still struggle with twists because of the material waves, but there are definitely some twist patterns where I'm like, that was worth it for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's why I get why people really like the mosaics. Like you don't have to worry about like overshooting or undershooting the pattern. It's just there. Like you don't have to worry about that kind of like extra factor. But like, you know, maybe on like some Viking swords or something like that, where they're going for like alternating stars and stuff like that, you really need to like think about like, okay, how close am I going to take this thing? And like, how stable is it going to be? Like how much can I deal with this, etc. But I think that's the fun of it, though. Like the fun of it is being able to like choose your aesthetic and like what you're going to do, and then also like as you get more developed in understanding pattern welding, like how close you can come to your plan is where the skill is. Like you have an idea in your head or you drew it down on paper, and sometimes, you know, shit like the steel doesn't do what you want it to do, and that's fine. We all have those days, but like when you get to the end of a project and you're like, that's exactly how I thought it would work, then like that's, you know, it's like a really rewarding,
absolutely, it's the best feeling
piece of the puzzle. Yeah,
because like you were talking about earlier about us kind of like a lot of these projects start as little fantasies, ideas bouncing around in our head, and then to see it manifest in real life and be a physical thing is really cool. I think it's one of my favorite parts of the whole creative process.
Of course. You know, when you did that braided twist thing?
Yes.
I drew that in my sketchbook like 3 weeks before you put that on Instagram. And I was just like, fuck, now I can't make that. I was just going to think I'm copying him.
No, you can make it. I mean, people have done some really cool stuff. I really like what Jordan did. Jordan Lamotte
Yeah.
did a really cool take on it where he had some bold
Yeah.
black on an edge, and it created
Yeah.
a really cool effect.
Yeah, I remember that piece. There's a really nice that he put forth. He actually visited me here about a month ago.
Oh yeah, because he's over in India right now, doing
Yeah,
his
he's
Fulbright
doing.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. He's learning how to do Kafkari with the living Indian artists of Kafkari work.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I hope it helps bring some awareness to what they're doing because, yeah, if those guys, I mean, if they're the last and it's not continued, and I know various cultures have similar techniques, but
Yeah,
it's not the same as something that's been passed down for centuries or whatever. Because it is a crazy
for sure.
I don't even know if I'm vaguely interested in doing it, but all I can think is like wasting materials and and how painful that could be. Like, oh no.
Especially, it's all like ultra skinny gold wire, 24 karat gold wire is like the best thing to do it with. So like,
Right.
it's not like a cheap thing to try.
No, not even close.
Yeah. Apparently you can do it with fine silver wire too, but it's again, like, I guess the wire is really hard to find. It's like 100-micron wire, like, and not
Oh
many
wow,
people make it. Yeah.
that is a fine
The
silver line.
yeah, and what was it? We also, when he was here, we visited my friend. He's a Turkish swordsmith.
Okay.
His name is Osman Bashkurt. Sorry, cats were going at it.
I know
They're
it sounds like Tom and Jerry back there.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, "Where's my dinner, Dad? What are you doing?" And he makes him and I don't know. I guess maybe like probably less than a dozen people in the world are making the traditional boot steel, and probably only him and one other guy are really getting the historical pattern. This guy Nico Heineman in Finland, and him here in Turkey. So we went and worked with him for maybe 4 days.
Oh, you guys went up and visited Nico, or you just
we made not with Osman.
Okay.
So we went to his place, which is maybe 3.5 hours from Istanbul on the Black Sea, and we spent maybe 4 days with him making a crucible steel ingot and forging it out and seeing how the process was, and him showing us some fun little secrets. But I can't really, I can't share them because they're like
That's
his
totally fair.
Butter, so
Totally fine.
He's a really cool guy, really hospitable. We got to eat like really amazing. Like, his mom made us like fresh Turkish food every day, like hanging out at his shop and stuff. So it was a really fun experience out there on the sea.
So he's like at a
he took
family
his
farm.
So we basically, he's got like his workshop is like, he has two spaces, like hot shop, and like one is his cold shop, and one is like near his parents' house, and then the other is out in an industrial district.
I gotcha.
And here in Turkey, they have like, it's like they have fairly strict rules about what you can do in certain areas, but then also not at all. So it's like, so it's kind of like, like my workshop is, it's a workshop space, and you can do like fire and like welding and machine noise and stuff like that. But the rest of the buildings around are residential. So after 6 p.m., I can't make any noise.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like you have to balance it between like getting your work done and pissing the neighbors off. So
hopefully you're trying to help your neighbors where you can, so you can make friends with them.
Oh yeah, for sure. Most people are like quite intrigued about a couple of American artists who are hanging out in this area of Istanbul, which there are no foreigners in at all.
Oh,
It's like
interesting.
very, very Turkish, and yeah. So we're like we make the neighborhood is called Umrania, and it's like very well known for just being an industrial manufacturing center, and
I see.
nobody goes there who's not working. So
I
like
see.
yeah, it's like especially the first couple times, you know, like I'd go out to like hardware stores and stores selling machines and tools and stuff like that. They're like, wait, you're why?
Why?
Yeah, why? But it's cool. It's great. I mean, it's really cool. You can get anything you need here. It's like they have a very interesting market for like machinery and industry and stuff like that.
Sure.
And it's very hospitable place. People are super helpful.
Nice. I mean, the Samac, right, comes from Turkey, which is probably
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
funnest hammers I've ever used. I love the Samacs.
Yeah, I have a 75 kilo from them. They
Nice.
were kind enough to let me buy it on installments, so they so I could pay it down over the year.
Sure.
Because you know, power hammers are a giant chunk of change.
Right.
But I've been really, really happy with it. It's a great machine. Great control, good power, easy to maintain. It's you know, like, and it's got a couple different features from the rest of the welded steel frame hammers
Okay.
of similar design. The new ones have a different oiling system, which requires very little oil, and then also instead of using like a pile of V belts on the drive pulley and the motor,
Okay.
it uses a giant timing belt, like for a
Oh,
truck.
okay.
So there's no slippage on the pinion. So you get a little bit more because you're never going to get the wheel, the pinion wheel, and the flywheel are never going to slip on you because it's on a like a tooth timing belt.
I
So I've
gotcha.
made a couple little adjustments in the machine to kind of give it a little bit more of an edge over the competitors. Their prices aren't still going to be like Anyang, but like it's a great machine
Yeah,
for the
they're
price.
awesome machines. Um, trying to think. So, I've been seeing some culinary knives from you lately, and I think you were at the France or the Paris knife show,
Mm-hmm.
right? How was the Paris show? I've
Yeah, I
always
went
been
to.
intrigued by that.
Well, it was interesting. It was a very interesting show. Uh, my impression was that the work I went to, it was the CCAC show. Normally there are two shows. There are Fix and CCAC, but this year Fix didn't happen. For some reason, I think the guy in charge was having some health problems or something like that. I heard. I
Okay,
can't confirm that or anything, but that's just how it happened.
sure.
Um, and so I asked. There's a collector there. His name is Alain Routine, and I was like, "What? Like, should I do this other show?" He goes, "Yeah, but why not? You know, if the other one isn't going on, I'll make an introduction for you and get you set up." And yeah, I went. It was a nice little show. Mostly, almost all folders. The whole show was folders.
Oh wow.
Very few fixed blades. I was the only guy with kitchen knives,
Okay.
and it was quite a small show. So I figured France kitchen knives. That should be easy. That should be an easy jump. But everything there was folding knives, like little.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the knives that I made, like, because I was thinking also maybe the people who would normally go to Fix would come to CCAC instead because they put them on the same day. Um, uh, for I don't know why, but they're usually the same day.
Okay.
But yeah, it didn't really seem that way. It seemed that and it was like maybe 130 makers, I think,
Oh wow.
130 tables, so quite a small show. Yeah, quite a small show, but like maybe the size of what the Arkansas show was a couple years ago. I don't know what it's like now.
Hmm. Yeah, I have no idea. Um, there's
Yeah.
some who was it? Oliver Goldschmidt was there, I believe. Was there
Yeah,
anybody
I
there
met
that
him
you were
for the
really
first
excited to
time.
meet?
He was really
Yeah,
kind.
yeah, he's a great
Yeah,
guy.
Oliver actually. I met Oliver. He was yeah. Uh, the the Jim Bowie project guy was there. His name escapes me at the moment, but he was there. I got to meet him.
Okay.
I met uh, um,
Not Sam
and
Lerquin.
I met a Ted. No, Sam Lerpin was not there.
Okay.
Um, and there was a couple actually just like young new French knife makers that were really cool.
Okay.
They're making little folding knives. They're like all like 19, 20 years old, just like very new and sprite, like have that youthful energy and excitement. It's just nice to see people just getting into it.
Right.
Um, uh, and yeah, Oliver Goldschmidt was really nice to meet. He's a fantastic guy. His work is like sublime to say the least. Like he has a
It's
really
so
really
good.
interesting take on like lines and textures and like how the knife as an object just has a really really unique point of view, I think. Um,
Yeah.
and who else was there? I met a really interesting, actually, probably the most interesting person I met was a tattoo artist. His name's Doc Price, uh,
Oh, cool.
and he
I've
was
heard of him.
yeah he's like the oldest tattooer of England.
Right.
Uh, and he's like he started in the 1970s, like when you could like tattooing was like really frowned upon, and he like had to make all of his own machines, which is how he got into metalwork. And he found knife making through some venue, and he comes to knife shows now. And he was sitting um, with Matt Diskin, who's like a designer for Kershaw,
Right.
uh, behind me. And so we were sitting back to back and just kind of chatting the whole show about like knives and tattoos and metal stuff. It was really, really fun.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, that guy's a legend. I've seen him on a lot of featured on a lot of things for his
Yeah.
tattoo
And
work.
he's very kind, very worldly, has a very like realistic kind of understanding of art and like when it opposed to like tattoos and knives and these kind of things. And I mean, it's kind of interesting talking to someone who like lived a really like I wouldn't say like lawless, but like like when you pick a profession that everybody hates in a time where there's no way to contact anybody else, like in the 1970s, and just try
Right.
to like work your way through it. Like it's really like
Sure.
a cool thing, I think. Um, but and the people who put the show on were really nice. Oh, there were some of the Brazilian makers were there. Oh, I met Julian Antunes. That's who that was one of the
Oh,
big
nice.
ones. He had set up a trip to do Fix, but since Fix didn't happen and he already had his plane tickets, him and his fiance just like came to Paris for a vacation, and they came to the show. He is a stellar individual. He's super
Oh,
kind,
cool.
really interesting, um, uh, like really, really nice. Obviously, his work is some of the best out there
Yeah.
right now, I think. Like,
It's very good. It's
yeah,
very good.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, I'd love
he,
to meet
he's
him.
he's probably one of my like favorite makers of like our generation of people.
Sure. Um, I was gonna just to step back to Oliver. I remember the first time I
Mm-hmm.
met him, I think at the 2019 Blade show. I
Mm-hmm.
think Will Stelter had introduced me to him, and I'd never
Uh-huh.
heard of or seen anything of Oliver's work, and I held it, and I was just like, "How have I never seen this before? Where are you hiding?"
Yeah, he's like on a
His
farm in
work,
Italy. That's where he's hiding.
yeah, I know exactly, and his work is. I hate to say simple because that's not. It's not simple. Yeah, I think it's actually really difficult to make really high quality simple things look
Oh,
simple.
of course. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
it's easy to make things look flashy, but to keep something, yeah, I don't know. Anytime I try to do a knife, even just simply without like a spacer, there's so much more I have to take into consideration, especially if it's an
Oh, of
integral and it
course.
needs to be and it's Damascus and it needs to be etched and all of that extra steps that go into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does a phenomenal work, and I would love to do a collaboration. I've talked to him about doing a collaboration together.
Uh-huh.
Just because I feel like if I made some steel, he would do anything he would do to it basically would make it look good. He does, yeah,
Up for it.
awesome work.
I thought his one of his Jim Bowie project knives was one of the more interesting ones that I
Mm,
liked that I saw. He had one that was kind of like an integral, but like the integral guard like sweeps seamlessly down into the clip, and I was like, this is such an interesting way to take that form on that I
mm.
would have never thought of myself.
I see what
And
you're
and
saying.
again, like you said, like it's his work is deceptive because it looks like at a glance you're like, oh, this is very like it's
It
like
looks,
maybe simple, but like
yeah,
the lines are so crisp and well thought out, and they just pull your eye all around the object, and there's no place that your eye like stops or something looks clunky or weird or anything like that. And the
right,
simplicity, like you said, is like it's easy to like load something up with distracting details like like file work, pins, engraving, like and just like overwhelm someone's like visual sensibilities, which is like
right,
totally it's totally cool to like do something like that and have this like really out there jeweled piece. But also like if you have something that's super minimal, um, it's there's nowhere to hide. There's nothing to like stop you from doing what you need to do. This is
for
Aria.
sure.
Hi.
Hi,
Oh.
Arya. Dude, I don't know why I can't pull up his Instagram
um,
right now. I'm trying to pull up his Instagram, but I can't
hmm,
find him. But I want to see
Goldschmidt
that piece.
knives, I think.
Gold Schmidt knives. Artist. I'm just trying to see if his oh, I see. Ah, yeah. I see what you're talking about now. About the
Yeah,
integral flowing into the spine like that. Yeah, that is a very interesting take. Way to get the lines to flow. And the way he does the inset butt caps too.
yeah, I really like
Very
those as
cool.
well. They're really beautiful. And as soon as he came out with them, I saw like a million people like immediately tried to copy it. I think that's when you hit on a cool aesthetic when all of a sudden you see like a pile of people
Right.
try to pull it off. Like
Everybody's trying to do it. Yeah.
yeah, like oh my god, that detail looks so cool. I'm gonna do it. And then you're like, haha, I found a
Right.
cool thing,
Yeah.
or
All
a
you can do
unique
is
thing.
just keep going forward. Yeah.
Exactly,
Or just
exactly. That's true.
yeah. Because I think the hard part is like we're all trying to differentiate ourselves and make our work stand apart, but it's also very limiting. But I think that's why, or it's we're limited. I don't know. I guess we're really only limited by our imagination because uh, it, I find myself wanting to repeat kind of like the same old thing that a lot of people say is that like
Yeah,
um that knives are limiting and you can't there's only so many iterations or things you can do, but still like I don't know, I see the work that you do and other makers that
mm,
are doing some really amazing incredibly creative stuff. And I mean even like that flint, the one that looks like flint,
yeah.
or some of these war axes are really cool. One I wanted to share is this kind of like I don't even know what you call it. Like it almost looks like a kyber knife with some like a Persian saber handle kind of on
Mm,
it. I don't know.
uh, yeah, it's based on an Indian dagger called a peshkabs.
Peshkabs.
And they have they're basically like these serpentine armor piercing daggers of kind of like varying lengths and styles. And
Okay.
there's a really huge aesthetic kind of like box that they kind of fall in
Okay.
from kind of like the Middle East to India. I think this one is kind of more Indian Afghani in its flavor, you might say.
Okay.
But they when I like to like look at like historic pieces and stuff like that, and kind of like
Sure.
see like, okay, so like what is like defining this thing in this object. So I was like, okay, it has this serpentine S curve, and it has the armor piercing point, and it has sort of like a kyber knife as well. Also has kind of this like integral ish
Yeah,
bolster
sure.
or attached metal bolster,
Right.
and then this sort of like big knob on the end of the handle. And like, how do you like? Okay, so like these are like my basic criteria of like what I need to work in. And actually, this was the, I want to say, the fourth iteration of this knife at this point in time. I had
Oh
made
wow.
3 others, and kind of like I had like gradually sort of like made the aesthetic more and more complex. And then the one I did after this one was the one with the ivory handle.
Which we will be seeing in just a
And
second.
Okay, cool. And but the thing that this one was on the cover of Blade magazine in, I think, sometime in early 2020, which I was really happy about. But to me, the pattern on this one is the like the thing that is the coolest part. Like I really like it. It just came out really flawless, and like the symmetry is like more better than I could have hoped for.
It's very good. It's very, very good. Um, and the tip out at that armor piercing point, how thick is it
Mhm.
at the thick or at the widest point, I guess from side to side?
Oh, I think it's pretty extreme. I think it's like a half an inch at the base of
Right.
it. Like
So it's almost
it's
like a tapered square from half
yeah,
inch at that point.
yeah, exactly. So it comes down from a square all the way to the point of diamond, I guess.
Yeah.
And I thought like I like I like to make things look kind of extreme. Like historically, I don't think that they were that thick, but uh, it makes the aesthetic kind of like pop to be like
Sure.
really beefy there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool to see that. Because
Mhm.
I feel like even though that's historically accurate, um, a
Mhm.
beefier tip like that is something that I don't see very frequently, in
Mhm.
people's work, especially in daggers or
Yeah.
something like that, where it makes
Also
sense.
interesting, right? And kind of interestingly, even when you see the historic Indian and Middle Eastern pieces, the edge geometry is like terrible.
Oh,
Like,
sure.
yeah, because you have these like big cross section tips. It leads to like you having like these super obtuse edges, and then
Right.
also like on a lot of these pieces, like where that knife is flat, it might be like a whole fuller, like a inset fuller, and then it
Mm,
leaves, maybe 3/16 or a quarter of an inch for your bevels on the outside, and to come to
right.
whatever thickness coming from whatever thickness you have. But what that just tells you is that they really didn't slash with it.
I got you.
Like it was not intended to be a slashing weapon. It was really only intended to be a piercing weapon, which is pretty like common of daggers across the time frames. They were sort of like the thing that you finished the guy off with. It wasn't like a thing that you fought with. Um,
Right.
like like in medieval Europe, they had famously the Bollock daggers, where the handle
Sure.
looks like a dick, and they wore it there. And basically, when in the times of knights in armor, swords actually were not super effective against other armored opponents, because you don't really have anywhere to cut, unless you get quite lucky with a hand or behind a knee or something like that. And assuming your other opponent was as skilled as you were, maybe this was not going to be an option. But what often happened was that they'd knock each other over. You get on top of them, and you just like stick the dagger through the eye slot of his helmet and get him that way, or like under a breastplate or something like that. So they're quite like horrifically intended pieces.
I see. Yeah. Now, part of me wonders if it was like an extra fuck you to them, to be like, I stabbed you with my dick knife.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, they're all penetrating objects. It's all cock extenders, man. Swords, daggers, knives. It's the same as a sports car today, dude.
Sure. That's funny. I want to jump over to that ivory piece because this is the one I asked you to let me use for the calendar, and you can kind
Mhm.
of see a little bit better uh, in this one the width out at that piercing tip.
Yeah,
It looks like a similar handle assembly, but the blade's definitely different material.
yeah.
Um,
Uh, this one has that kind of same chevron pattern. That piece actually started as an offcut from a big sword that I made for my master's thesis. I made this big kind of early Arabian sword. It's like the blade I think, is 40 inches long and three and a
oh
half
wow.
inches wide at the base. Um, and I had no idea how much material I would need for it, and I made myself about a foot extra material, and I turned it
Oh
into
wow.
this dagger. Uh,
Okay.
and so this chevron pattern is where the outside bars of this steel are an accordion cut, super dense W construction. I think
Mm.
every 2 to 3 inches of that knife is 5,000 layers of crushed
Oh wow.
W material.
Okay.
Um, and then the center bar is this chevron is actually kind of a mosaic. Um,
Okay.
you, I'll describe it and see if it makes sense. So you take a you take a billet, straight layers, and you just forge weld it and forge it like as minimally as possible so that all the layers are still as straight as they can be. And then you take that and you just do like a normal tiling setup. So you cut, your 30-degree or 45-degree tiles off that billet of straight bars, and you weld that up, and basically you'd end up with a bar that has like what looks like on the surface would be just straight lines going across it. And then on the side, on the edge of the billet, you see the chevrons.
Right.
So you'd have all those diagonal lines now on the side of the thing, and then you take that bar and you cut strips off of it, and then you book match them.
Right.
You turn them 90 degrees and you book match them, so then you can take those chevrons and put them on the sides of the bar and turn it into like a flat assembly.
Sure.
So it's like a it's a mosaic, but the wrong way. It's
It's still I think that's still a mosaic. Because in
yeah,
that case, the most interesting part is actually any face, basically, with a straight layer
yeah.
billet, and so you're just using it in a different way than most people do. I've never seen anybody do that before I saw you do it. Um,
Mm,
and what was really I don't know, what threw me off was the lack of distortion. Like you're saying, you forge it basically as little as possible to reduce the amount of
yeah,
distortion in those straight lines, and then you work with it from there. And that's what really threw me off. I was
yeah.
like, how the hell did he get these lines so damn straight?
Well, it's like it's more of an assemblage than it is a forging at that point. You're trying to, like, everything is being like just touched enough to get it to fuse, just barely, like everything is already at size, so
Sure.
you don't want to take it down too far, because if you forge it down, then the angle of the layers is going to change for your
Right.
assembly, and you want everything to meet up. So it's like again, you're talking about like when to forge and when not to forge, and this one is a pattern where you should not forge, and you should forge as little as possible. Um,
So when you talk about it being um just basically forge welded at size, like the actual even some of the tapers, or was it kind of more of a bar shape and then you forged it into the
um,
prolonged taper?
uh,
Or was or go ahead.
yeah,
I'd
it
be
was it was
curious to hear more.
sorry, yeah, we had the delay to deal with. It was this one was forged it was forged with the intention of the sword. So the sword has the layers are more almost 45 degrees, and then to make the
Okay.
dagger, I obviously had to forge it down more. But I think actually it works really well in this context because
For
the
sure.
way that the dagger is or how it's forged is like basically it's one long straight tape, and then it's fish mouth welded at the end.
Yep.
Um, and so in this gradual long taper, the pattern gets kind of more and more extreme towards the tip, and that's the same in the other piece too that we showed. And I
Sure.
think that really kind of like aids seeing like the motion of the knife, like it makes the knife
Right.
seem like it's going somewhere.
Right.
And so this piece is more distorted than the sword, but I like the effect a lot. Like
Sure.
it gave.
When you're setting up a billet like that, that's gonna receive very little kind of reduction in size, because that's typically what a lot of conventional wisdom basically says, is that you have to go through massive reduction to get things to weld. What
Mhm.
what are you doing to prep your material? Like, are you taking it to a really high fine finish? How tight does everything fit together before you start forge welding? Are you throwing a jacket on there of some sort to help reduce oxygen that's getting into the material?
I do a lot of different things, a lot of what you just said. So I do, if I'm setting up a multi-bar kind of construction like this, I always square everything off on the grinder, and I make sure it's as flat as it can be. Like I'll even if it's a small thing, I'll surface grind it. If it's a bigger assembly, I'll mill it on the milling machine so that I have like a really like I know everything is a really square assembly. For
Mhm.
this piece, I jacketed it because it's also powder in this one.
Right. Okay, yeah.
So
Sorry, we'll go back to
yes,
the other
this
one.
one. Okay, this one. And if I can't, and if I know that I'm gonna have like the room to grind material away on the outside, I'll TIG weld every single seam.
I got you.
Like I'll fusion weld every seam so that there can be no possible oxygen infiltration. And I do almost all of my forge welding. I either, if it's important and I'm getting close to the end of a process or I have a really specific idea in mind, I will either jacket it or I'll TIG weld all the
Sure.
seams because it's like it's a process, like it takes 5 minutes more to TIG weld all the seams or 10 minutes more to get around all the seams or to like maybe a half
Right.
an hour to put a jacket on it. And uh, you've already invested so much time and energy in the material to have it go wrong on like the last forge weld is like an
Because
absolute
you're trying to save
disaster.
yourself 5 minutes or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's never worth it. It's never worth it to not spend
Never
the extra
worth it.
time.
That happened to me recently. I was laying up, and set up a billet, and I didn't take the steel to a high enough of a finish, I think, and, um
Mhm.
and it's like, "Damn it." To get it from 120 to 220 was literally only another 5, maybe 10 minutes at the most, and that would have been 100% would have been worth it to have done that,
Right.
rather than to be stingy. I get stingy at the wrong time.
Right. I think we all do. Like, especially like I don't know. It depends on how you're feeling that day. Or like this morning was annoying, and I'm having an annoying afternoon in the shop, so I'm not going to do everything I need to do, even though I
Right,
know it's the right way to do it because I'm feeling like a little like uh just like pissy with my day. Like
right, yeah,
it's totally like yeah, I have those moments where I'm just like I'm like ignoring parts of a process because I'm like fuck it, I'm mad today. Ooh. Like
Eh.
yeah, exactly. Man, I'm annoyed.
Yeah.
I'm gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna make my day worse now.
That's the best way. That's
um,
always the best, policy. Make it
yeah,
worse.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You know who has a really, really incredible process about this that I actually took a lot from? I saw him demonstrate it at one of Travis Wertz's hammer-ins, is Owen Wood. He does these assemblies where basically like he basically encases the knife in a box, or like
Sure.
so say you have like he has these like super fine herringbone patterns where all the lines are like exact 45s or exact 60 degrees and they don't move or
Sure.
waver at all.
Yeah.
And he puts them in this he mirror finishes each edge. He assembles it so like the final placement of the edge is there, and then he makes mild steel, basically bumper blocks around the whole knife, and then jackets it and forge welds it, and he just goes bink, and that's it. Like, and because all the surfaces are mirror finished and because it's inside of a neutral environment, he doesn't need any more than that. And then the patterns don't move at all. They're like exactly where he placed them.
Right.
And I've used this technique a couple of times to get things like to like weird forge welded assemblies. Like there's a sword guard. I don't know if you have a picture of it, but it's the one with the gold on it. I did kind of like the same idea with that to try to like get this really weird forged assembly to come together.
Oh, interesting. Instead
And
of
this is
hot
also
forming it.
the piece. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I basically like if you look at that guard, it's made of like L-shaped pieces of twisted material and then a mosaic tile in the center of it. And I
Sure.
did that the same way where I basically just like set everything up and I made all the surface finishes really fine and the fits really fine. And then I made mild steel bumper blocks and encased the whole thing and stuck it under the hydraulic press and it was just like, dunk, dunk, and it was done. So you can do some really, really interesting bits of forge welding as well as like get some assemblies. I think also with the neutral environment stuff, you can get some really, really interesting assemblies that you really wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
I want to try to. I've never done a screen share, but I want to try to do this. Let's see. Do I want to just do a window? Yeah. I'm gonna jump into my downloads. Let me know. Can you see I'm in here looking
Yeah, I
through
can see
these?
it.
Okay. Because I want to open up, I want to find that sword so we can get a closer look at it. Let's see. There it is. And then I'm going to zoom in on that hilt. There. I mean, for you, it might still be a little bit on the small side. And this is on your website. Oh, sorry. Say again.
Yeah. It's not zooming in for me at all.
Oh, okay.
It's not big. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Never mind then. Screen share failed.
But here, I'll as I'm on my phone, I can't get you the thing, but I can send it to you on Instagram, or sorry, from I guess I'll save it and I'll send it to you on Facebook, which is up right now. I have a close-up image of it. See if that works for you.
So
If
I
not, I can
only
also
use.
dig it out of my.
It came through, but I only use Messenger on my phone. So, and I never use it on my computer. So I'm not even logged into Facebook.
Oh. Okay, I'll do. I have a better idea.
This is a riveting podcast, by the way. This is the dead air. Perfect.
I know. Knife makers try to use technology. Here, how about email? That's a easy way to do it.
What time is it where you're at, by the way? It's like 7 p.m.
Yeah, 7 o'clock. Yes, about 7 p.m.
Or about 5. Almost 7.
Yeah, what time is it over there?
It is
7 a.m.
8. It's 8:51 in the morning
Oh, nice.
on the Pacific.
Sorry, I made you get so early.
No.
All right,
I'm usually up this early. Just yeah, I'm not usually trying to have a meaningful conversation with anybody this early in the morning.
That I understand. I try not to talk for a couple hours in the morning because nothing comes out right.
Okay, I'll try to share again. I'll pop over to the email. Can you see it there?
Yeah.
Does it zoom in at all?
Yeah, now it's zooming in. But also I sent another one because I realized that one has kind of like focus blur on it, and I have another. There's a new email that's come in that has not the focus blur on it, so you can see it.
Okay.
Better.
Let's see another one. There we go.
Same one. There you go.
So there you
go. You see, yeah, there we go. That was worth it.
Okay. We're doing it.
Yeah, you see how those twisted elements kind of like wrap around a central core.
Oh yeah, I see that square shape there.
Yeah.
Actually, it's kind of curved, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like they're kind of like L shapes basically. So they go out one tine and into another. So and they alternate, like one is an explosion and one is a normal twist. So there's on the left side of the sword it's an explosion, on the right side it's a normal twist, and then they kind of mirror each other diagonally.
Oh yeah, I see that kitty corner. Right.
Yeah. And then the mosaic in the center actually got really distorted when I was like forging the piece to be put in there. It was more interesting, but I lost some of it from an unintended distortion. Like I forged this kind of like star-shaped thing, and on the outside it looked really good, but I guess on the inside I pushed the pattern like out. I don't really exactly kind of know what happened, and then when I cut into it, it looked like that, and I was like, oh, that's a little boring, but like, yeah, what are you gonna do at this point?
Yeah, I mean, you still made it look great though. I think
that's awesome. No, I'm super happy with the end result of it. I mean, it's really interesting forging at the end of the day.
Yeah. When the gold, is that just gold leaf, or is that somehow
it's like heat applied gold foil. So it's a little bit thicker than the leaf, and it's it's a Korean technique called kumbu, and it's you put the piece of steel on a hot plate and you get it to like tempering temperatures, maybe 500 degrees, and the gold will just if you're really quick before the heat oxidation really builds up, you can get it to fuse to the the surface of the steel. Yeah, and it's a little finicky. It was funny. I actually thought I was like the first person to do it on Damascus steel when I did it. And I posted about it, and Van Barnett was like, actually, I did it in 1993. It's a difficult process. I found no use for it, but here's the blade I did. I was like, oh, shit.
Damn it. I thought I invented something.
It's all been done before, which is the problem.
Let's see. I got another piece here. I think this Bowie. So this is a Woots, I believe, right? Or is it highlighted
Yeah,
Damascus?
no, it's Woots from Peter.
Okay. So this
Yeah,
was part
yeah.
of your um gosh, what was
My
it called?
yeah,
Your thesis.
master's thesis. Yeah.
Right.
So I guess it kind of maybe warrants an explanation. My idea was kind of to make weapons. They were I used this term fantasy actually
Okay.
in terms of like things, but to use processes from cultures that would have never met.
I
So
got
to
you. Yeah,
make
yeah, sure.
like a yeah, so to like make a Woots Bowie knife, like a Woots fighting knife with like kind of like geometric turning and but also be desert ironwood and have like kind of traditional American or European file work on it and have it
Right.
be of a I think this pattern of Bowie is from a San Francisco company in like 1890 or something like that. It's like a
Hmm.
classic. It's like a classic Bowie shape that I think uh, what's his name also has well. So it's like a classic American West Bowie knife, but also made in Persian steel.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like this meeting of ideas from different times and worlds that could have never happened. So that's like where the
Right.
fantasy is for me.
Yeah, I like that. That's a
Um,
cool way to think about making or creating things.
yeah, and the thesis in general was kind of all centered around this thing because the idea more or less was that like so if you delve into like ah contemporary art philosophy, we'll say
Okay.
they say that fine art fine art's only function is to be beautiful and to be aesthetically appreciated is like the general idea of it. So to have an object that is functional excludes it from being fine art because it has a secondary function that is not just being beautiful.
Okay.
Um, and whether you buy that or not is your own choice. But as I was at a fine art program, I wanted to try to justify making functional objects into being fine art.
Sure.
So, uh, what kind of like the general idea of it is that weapons specifically are fine art because the context that a weapon used to exist in doesn't exist anymore. So
Mm,
even though it's a
right.
functional, even though it's like something that has a functional aspect to it, like it's sharp, it can stab, cut. That's not its purpose. Its purpose
Sure.
is as a ritual object of like power and authority and um, like oppression and violence and all these kind of like complex emotional arrangements that like sword wielding and weapon wielding people kind of like imbue upon them, whether the
Right.
blade has kind of like inscriptions of righteousness or like it was used to dominate an enemy or people are afraid of it. Like bladed weapons have this sort of kind of duality of consequence
For sure.
and idea behind them. And today, people don't carry swords. I mean, yeah, if you see someone in public with a sword, you're still probably gonna like be like, "What the fuck?" But
For sure. Like, what are you doing, bud?
yeah, exactly. I'm about to witness something terrible. Oh no. But it's not like the daily aspect of life, like
Right.
it's not, you were not seeing kings and lords sidle down the street with a retinue of soldiers and you better not fuck with them or they're gonna fuck you up and they got the swords to do it. Or you're
Right.
not seeing, princes and kings being crowned with, glorious sabers of holy righteousness. Um, so to me, these objects are they're objects out of time, like they don't exist in in time anymore. And also the objects that I made, like while they reference history, they don't come from any particular place in history.
Mm,
They're not like one to one because they're all kind of mishmashes of cultures and mishmashes of processes and ideas and materials. So
yeah.
they don't actually have any place in time. They don't actually have a place in history, but they're referencing them. So they get to kind of be on their own as separate objects that you can just enjoy aesthetically because there's no they have no other reason to exist.
Sure. No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody explain it that way, and that makes the best sense to me as to why somebody might say that what we do as knife makers is not art. And so I can understand that quite a bit better now than I have before, because
Yeah.
I've had friends or know people with art backgrounds who are like, knife making is not art, but then they can't explain it very well.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like,
So it's
okay,
like,
so I think mostly it's not art because you're just saying that it's not art, but how you've defined it makes sense.
right.
Yeah,
But also, you know, like it depends on how you buy into it as well, too. I happen
sure.
to be in this environment where I needed to like justify, because like most of fine art in the world is validated through its justification, like academically or philosophically, like
Sure.
how, you know, contemporary artists can like just like splash a bunch of watercolors on a giant canvas and say that it's contemporary fine art and sell it for $10 million, like is justified. It's not justified through skill, it's justified through concept and philosophy. It's not so I found myself basically in this art school, and I could have like knuckled down and just said making knives because I want to make knives and I have the freedom to make knives. But it's more interesting to be like, okay, so like I'm being armed, I'm taking all these classes in these art, like lofty art philosophies. Like what, like how do I really justify this? Like how do I?
Sure.
Is there a way in fine art to justify the production of these objects and to call them art in the fine art context?
Right.
Which is, you know, like I mean, I guess that's what attracted me to product design in the beginning, was that I like kind of like constrained boxes, I guess. Okay. Sometimes be like, okay, you need to like work within this window of ideas to try to see what you can get out of it. And that, so I kind of, I guess, sure, I treated it that way. Yeah, so like I don't necessarily always know how much I buy into the philosophy of contemporary art. Sometimes I see stuff and I go, oh, that was really clever. Like I totally get why that's like a really successful piece. And then other times I'm like, yo, you're full of shit. You're just like
yeah. You've obviously been inspired by talented makers like JD Smith, and friends like Kevin Kline and Zach Jonas. But who else have been some, or I guess what other makers, but also I guess kind of you talked about how you've been inspired by Middle Eastern and Turkish stuff and Indian stuff. But I guess maker wise, who've been some strong inspirations for you? Yeah, we'll start there.
Really, one of the first makers I think that JD introduced me to was Virgil England. I thought was incredibly interesting. He used to work in Alaska. I don't know if he's still particularly active anymore, but he was making these like extremely out there, like fine art kind of stuff, like very super sculpted, super sculptural, like barely even knives anymore. I would say like wild tribal looking thing. We've got another cat visitor.
Another visitor.
Hi, buddy. And I was like, oh, like, wow, you can like, it was like the first thing I saw. It was one of the first things I saw where I was like, oh, you can really like push this into another dimension if you really want to.
Interesting.
I love a lot of the South American contingent of guys like Rodrigo Sofredo and Julian Antunes. I think that they have like a really sublime way of kind of like attaching form and decorative details that's not like overwhelming and still like tasteful. There's like also I take a lot of like influence not just from knife making, but like I read a ton of fantasy and sci-fi stuff. Like I love that adventure and I love those kind of worlds. I play, like I said, my first thing that I made was inspired by World of Warcraft. I can't
Right.
say that those influences aren't still there. I'm still reading. I'm still, playing video games when I can and that
Got
sort
you.
of stuff. I mean, the imagination and creativity involved in those worlds, I think, is unbelievable. Sometimes, like far beyond anything that I'm capable
Sure.
of. Knife maker. I mean, you're a really influential knife maker. I really love watching when you develop new patterns and stuff like that. Not to pet the host or anything, but definitely, I mean, we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah, no. Thank you.
Um, the Anders Hagstrom, I always really liked his way of kind of like dealing with lines and objects because he doesn't use Damascus at all. And his kind of like palette is very uniform, and he always
Interesting.
has
Okay.
like like he's either like brass or bronze or copper. The handle is the knife is always pretty much the same steel unless he gets the thing, and then, like his handles come in a very particular way, and I feel like he always finds a very interesting way to always compose something new, but still maintain his style. Uh, what else am I really thinking of? I mean, I like seeing a lot of the older ABS guys. I mean, even like oh shoot, he's in Arizona. He passed away like last year or a couple years ago. Tim
Hancock.
Hancock. Yeah, I didn't understand the fascination with like the Bowie knives and the American West fighters until I held some of his work.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
he had like a unbelievable sense of subtlety in the work, in the way that the handles and the lines all came together. And again, something that seems like deceptively simple, but was like all of a sudden became incredibly complex to me. And I had like his work specifically gave me a different appreciation for that style of work.
Sure.
Mike Quesenberry, I can't say enough good things about that guy. He's
pretty awesome.
a wealth of knowledge and kindness and fun. Like I've hung out with him. I used to go to Travis's Hammer Inn out in Arizona, and we'd all hang out every year for a few days. And I always see him at knife shows, and he's always just like the kindest dude. And he makes some incredibly inspiring work.
Right.
That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Sure. Tim Hancock. Tim Hancock is a maker, or was a maker, who I would have loved to have gotten my work in front of. Just curious to see like what his thoughts and feedback were.
Yeah.
So it's like he was one of those guys who is so well respected by other very talented makers, but also helped kind of like helped a lot of very talented makers get their start, kind of like JD did for you.
Yeah.
And some of those other guys. And yeah.
I met him at that Hammer Inn a couple times, and I was always like super intimidated to show him anything that I was working on. But anytime I did, he always had like the most positive. I showed him some of my JS knives when they were in progress, and he had just like really just like kind feedback, and like was just like, oh, when you're like, I remember he showed me like how to make a jig for grinding clips. That was like I would have like to make I think it was like a platen, but the platen basically was a piece of pipe.
Okay.
So the belt ran horizontally over the pipe, and you basically had like a longitudinal round, and then to like set your like table up on your grinder so that it went at a specific angle. And he goes, if you do it like this, you can get like an exact facet on either side and then you can also run it up the grits and not have to finish it by hand because you have like a surface, like a kind of like a surface you're working on. I was like, oh my God, that's so smart. He's like, yeah, I know.
That's great.
So yeah, the first couple, I remember the first time I put some of my JS knives in front of him, and I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna get torn to pieces. And he was actually like just super helpful, really nice, like very gentle kind of soul.
Nice.
You could see, yeah, nice guy. I feel lucky that I got to meet him a couple times for sure.
Are there any makers that you still have yet to meet that whose work really blows you away?
I'd love to meet more of the guys like the AKI guys. Someone also Peter Johnson. I totally skipped out on that. Peter Johnson's work is like incredibly inspiring. I
Absolutely.
got to take a
Yeah.
class with him and like hang out with him, and he's again just like he's a true artist in his understanding of objects and aesthetics and stuff like that. Like I can't say enough good things about that guy.
Right.
I mean, there's some like I'd love to meet some of these like Russian workshop dudes just to
Okay.
see how they're like they you see these like stunt pieces that are like I don't know, the sword is like a suit of armor and it's got like this stand that's like castle walls and it looks like it must have taken years to accomplish, but somehow they did it in just a couple of months. I'd love to just hang out in their workshop and see how they're doing this stuff. And, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure about knife makers that I haven't met yet. I'd love to have a more in depth. I met Rodrigo Sofredo for like a minute one
Oh,
time,
sure.
and I'd love to have like a more in depth conversation with him. Just like talk more about life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, the Another knife maker who's really fun to talk to about that is Mastersmith Christoph Derringer. I don't know if you've ever met
Oh, yeah.
him.
I've met him a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a wild ride. I really like talking to him.
He is a very interesting take. I like him too. He's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a very out of the box mind way of
Yeah.
thinking about things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I
nice.
remember someone was like, because I think he sort of started this like integral thing in the knife making world a little
Oh,
bit,
did it?
maybe. Yeah. He kind of like, because all of his knives are forged out of like ball bearings.
Sure.
And he goes, someone I remember being at the New England School of Metalwork Cameron, and I think it was Zach maybe asked him, so like, how did you get so efficient on like forging these knives out of these bearings? And he goes, well, I'm extremely cheap and the bearings are free.
I mean, if that's what you got to work with, then
Yeah,
yeah, you get
yeah,
efficient really quick.
yeah, exactly.
Are there tools that are missing from your workshop that you wish you had?
Oh,
Like for your ideal setup?
right now I'm in need of a milling machine really badly and a better belt grinder. Right now I'm using this kind of like Frankenstein machine that's like really I fight it more than I need
Okay.
to. But luckily we have upcoming my partner and I are going to be making a bunch of props for a movie. And the movie company is going to get us a bunch of things, and one of those things might be a milling machine. So
Oh, great.
we'll have when we'll have access to, so we'll be able to upgrade some stuff in the shop.
For sure.
Yeah, in that sense, I'd love a surface grinder, like a real stone, like a stone surface grinder.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Um, I had one I had access to one at SIU, and I wasn't sure that I like if it was something that like a process that I really needed. And then after having access to it for 3 years, I was like, oh my God, this is an indispensable object. Like,
Sure.
um, and yeah, I think once I get the better, but also next week I'm going to go back to America and we're going to finally ship all of our possessions from America to Turkey.
Okay.
And in there I have a TW90. In there I have
Oh, nice.
like
That'll help.
clockmaker's milling machine, a very small clawsing milling machine. So I'll be able to do some tighter stuff. I'd like to kind of get back into folders, and doing like more frame handle stuff with like takedowns and things like that. I really enjoy. I like mechanical stuff a lot.
Yeah.
And once I have those, because like right now in the shop, the thing that I can make the most reliably is integrals, because I don't really have good tools for fitting parts.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and integrals are like the simplest way forward on that front.
For sure.
If at least flat fits, like if it's just like flat square fits, it's not, that's really easy to deal with.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that once I have those things, I think it's pretty easy. It'll be pretty easy to kind of like get back to the caliber of work I made. I'd also really love a hydraulic press, but I don't need it right now. It's like
I gotcha.
yeah.
What do you like using the hydraulic press for versus the hammer?
If you're doing certain like forming operations, like having the steadiness of the press is nice. Like like instead of having the like whack whack whack, if you can kind of if you have just like the is a little nicer, a little easier to control, and kind of put things exactly where you'd like them to be.
Okay, yeah.
Which you can do on the hammer as well. Like the Samac has it has like saddle tooling holes in the dies, so all the dies you can put tools on, and I've done that pretty effectively so far. But it's not always. It's like it's an option that works totally, and it's like, I mean, drop forging is an industrial thing forever. So, but it's a little more complicated to like make the tools do what you would like them to do, because the forces are different. Whereas like the hydraulic press, it just kind of is like 1-to-1. Yeah.
I've seen you're doing a lot more engraving. Actually, one of the last times I think I saw you was when after you picked up your engraving set and you were driving back with it, and you stopped by Dragon's Breath. I was forging a weird little blacksmith oyster shucking knife.
Yeah, I remember that day. It was a fun day.
Yeah. But it's been cool. So you're working on some engraving. What are some other things that you're like, skills you're working on developing, and upcoming projects that you're really excited about? Or I guess kind of concepts for projects maybe too.
The engraving was really good. I got lucky in that I got a grant to buy some engraving equipment, and then I happened to find someone who was selling. It was like the wife of a knife maker, like a hobbyist knife maker, like bought an entire GRS setup, and then decided she didn't like it. So it's just like sitting in her house, and I had posted on the internet, one of the Facebook forums, that I was trying to like find out what engraving equipment was worth buying and if I should get it used or something like that. And this lady contacted me, and she was like, "I have the whole thing. What can you pay for it?" And I was like, "Okay." Yeah, she just wanted it to go to someone who was young, who was going to use it. So I got super, super lucky. And I got a really good deal on it. And I started, that was kind of like during the pandemic. Like we were finishing graduate school, but like also we couldn't really use the facilities at the school at all, because there was all these weird constraints over, nobody knew what was going on. So I had the engraving set up at home. So I just like was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just teach myself some engraving then, because I've now got all this surplus time.
Right.
I wouldn't say I've done anything that could be considered like professional grade with it yet, but I'll be interested when we get our stuff from America here to get back to it. It's like very nice. Like it's like kind of like drawing, and I haven't got to do a lot of that lately. So I like it's like quiet, more focused work. Oh, I mean, the machine isn't very quiet. The pneumatic thing is kind of
Bah.
yeah. But you get headphones in and kind of get your face in the microscope and just sort of zone in.
Sure.
It's pretty nice.
Do, how do you foresee using that kind of embellishment on your work in the future?
I mean, of course, I think like traditional sort of scroll work is quite lovely, but I don't think that I'd like to do that. I think I'd like to try to maybe develop my own aesthetic with it.
Sure.
Like Andrew Mears has kind of developed his own sort of like aesthetic with that whole realm of objects and speaking, and I think I'd like to kind of go down that
Cool.
road more.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, it's probably a long way off before I've got anything that
Okay.
I'll be really like professionally happy with. Hopefully, I can get in a little engraving every week as when the stuff gets here.
How long are you guys going to be in the
And
States?
then I'm just going to be here for a week. It's really quick. Basically,
Okay.
like I've got to get my stuff from the storage unit to the shipper, which is already set up, and then I've got to like do a bunch of paperwork. I have to ship some knives that people bought here over there, and then I have like my sister has like almost 1-year-old baby I haven't met yet, so I'm gonna hang out with
Oh,
them.
wow.
Just kind of
That's
do
great.
like family time. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So it's gonna be a very fast business trip, more or
Sure.
less. So
How does the new kid do around beards?
I don't know yet. We don't know. I'll be. I think his dad has a short beard, but I don't know about
Okay.
mine. I don't think yet.
You've always
Hi.
sported quite a large beard. I know that for some kids that is a big red flag. Like,
Yeah.
"Ah!"
Yeah. Last few years, it's been more manageable though. So
Sure.
yeah,
That's
not
good.
I used to have that. That was like I don't know. It was like 18 inches long. It was a little bit
Great bushy
crazy.
beard. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, what kind of projects do you or kind of I don't know, are maybe already in the works or something that you're really excited to try to work on in the coming year, like in the
Um,
like I said, in the next maybe next 5 years or so. Some
well,
plans for down the road.
in the immediate future, I have this from my piece of steel that I took from that week of making crucible steel with Jordan and
Mm,
Osman. I have finished like a kinjal blade out of it. So I'll be excited to finish the handle for that, and like hopefully the coming months, depending on how this movie project goes.
mhm.
Which I think is going to be all consuming for a few months.
Sure.
But once we have that kind of rolling and I can see sort of like what the schedule for that looks like, then I can hopefully get back into working on some of my personal projects. In that time, I think I want to explore some more of these integrals. They were kind of fun. They were pretty fun to make. I do like making the odd, more like normal functional piece. And I'd like to get back to making more of these daggers,
Sure.
the peshkabs, and like Mongol Indian conjars and stuff like that. I think are really really sexy and fun.
Like
Um,
this style kind of thing?
yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't started it yet, but I have an open kind of like thing. There's the Turkish Military Museum, which is in Istanbul. I have sort of like
Mm,
an open research opportunity with them that I have to go and start. And I wanted to explore more of these kind of early Arabian, early Arabic swords, and
cool.
document them and kind of see what they are about a little bit more. But I've heard that their like archive of objects is like incredibly impressive.
I believe
So
it.
I'll be happy to dig around that place and see what I can come up with as new kind of inspiration and material.
Yeah, that's super cool. So that is something that's definitely happening soon?
Yeah, I have to. Well, I had to like figure out how to apply to
Okay.
do it because it had to, and it took like a year
Oh wow.
because it was like I contacted the consulate, the American consulate, and I was like, hey, they said um, you guys have to do something about contacting them. Like it has to come from you guys. It can't come from me.
Mm,
And they were like, we don't do that kind of a thing. And I was like, all right, well, they told me you did, so I don't know. And then I kind of like poked around a little bit more and tried to like phrase the email a different way.
mm,
And then and then I was like, no, oh, this museum is run by the military. Who would you guys need to talk to in the military to like set something up? And they're like, oh, you need the defense attaché. So they had to forward my request to the American Defense Attaché in
mm.
Ankara, and the American Defense Attaché had to forward my request to the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who then asked the military if it was okay, and they have to basically like say, is this project in the interest of the Turkish people
Right.
to do? To let a foreigner, because Turkey is very sensitive about its cultural assets, because
Sure.
many of its things were stolen by the British Museum in Germany in
Yeah.
the early 1900s. So there's stuff today. They're super strict about who they let in and what kind of work that they can do. So the
Mm.
whole process was hard to figure out the path, and then it took about a year to like get the okay.
Wow.
But in that sense, you just like persistent. You just try to email people and see what's going on and try to ask the right questions. Usually, you can find an answer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, since you've been over in that part of the world, what if I feel like I've seen you taking a little bit of advantage of your proximity to things, to do a little bit of traveling. What are some of the things
Oh.
that you've been most excited to see since you've been over there
Uh.
in Turkey?
Well. I mean, like I got to go to Athens, which was really fun. I mean, like flying to Europe from Turkey is like flying to Atlanta or Florida or something from New York or Boston. The flights
Sure.
are short, they're cheap. It's like easy to deal with. And in Turkey, basically, like you can only drive on a foreign driver's license for 6 months from your last entry date. So every 6 months, I have to like go somewhere else so that I can get a new stamp so I can keep driving. And
Okay.
yeah, so one time we spent a weekend in Athens just to kind of like get the new stamp, and I got to go see like in the Athens Archaeological Museum there are um, they attribute them to King Agamemnon, but there's nothing to say that it was actually him. And King Agamemnon is the king who sacks Troy in
Mhm.
the Iliad.
Yeah.
So, um, but they're like these incredible bronze pieces, and I don't know if it's like an inlay or if it's some sort of like foil application, like filigree application, maybe on
Okay.
top of the bronze, but of these like incredible, either like incredibly detailed, either geometric figures or like figurative forms of like war scenes on these bronze blades, all done in gold and silver and
That's crazy.
probably other strange alloys. Is really inspiring to see those.
Yeah.
I last year I got really lucky, or in my last year of graduate school, actually, I got lucky to go to Munich,
Mm.
um, and because we had set up this thing to go see this jewelry expo, and there was some really incredible museums in Munich. Love to get back to England and see stuff from the Wallace collection. I went there many years ago, and I'd love to go
Yeah.
back. Um, at the British Museum, and I went. and for the Paris show, I went and I saw the French military museum,
Okay.
which had some really interesting armor and some old like kind of Germanic swords and things like that.
Hmm.
And I'd love, I mean, honestly, I'd love to go back to Sweden and go back to the see everyone that I worked with in Sweden, and when I have time, and go back to the Swedish National History Museum. The Swedish National History Museum has an incredible back room of like Viking swords and
Oh,
Germanic
cool.
swords and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Ulfberts, pattern welded stuff, like, and it's all in like pretty good condition. Or I mean, well, good condition for like,
For
you know,
something
being
so old. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, 1,000-year-old swords found in the dirt. And in this, I guess in this region, I'm not sure. I've yet to kind of like see what any museums and stuff are available for in the Middle East. I know that there's stuff, but I don't know. I think most of it's probably private collections by appointment only kind of thing. I haven't really explored it, but I mean,
I get
Turkey
you.
has a lot of resources just in Istanbul, or has like really fantastic museums that have a lot of really impressive swords and work in them.
Sure.
Um, yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to get up to I really want to see some of those old spathas that have the interesting patterns.
Mm.
I want to see those in person.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Illerup Odal finds.
Yeah.
I'd really love to see those in
Yeah.
person. I think they're in Denmark,
Yeah.
um, as far as I know. But those are historically fascinating set of swords, because you know, like, I guess also kind of like in my thesis, I was kind of talking about like, you know, we have this constant conversation in all of blacksmithing. I was like, that's not the real Damascus steel. That's, you know, like you always have this armchair conversation, and
Actually,
yeah, yeah.
right.
And from my research, anyway, it turns out they're both the real Damascus steel. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't, like, we have these Illarupodal finds, which are from 200 AD ish, I think, and but there's 400 pattern welded swords in this find. It's not a small amount.
No.
Like, and they're mosaics. They're like complex multi bars. They're like super composed patterns,
Yeah.
and having um, one, such a volume, and two, such complexity suggests like a large lineage, or a workshop that had a large lineage from somewhere that had to go back a couple hundred years. So then you're putting at least purposeful pattern welding a few hundred years before that.
Yeah.
And then there's textual evidence that Alexander the Great was paid in 30 ingots of Indian steel for a conquest in India. So that's kind of like suggestive of it being crucible steel. So then
Yeah.
Alexander the Great was 300-ish. So then you have
Oh,
crucible
wow.
steel going back to 300 BC. If you take that as contextual evidence of crucible steel, I kind of think it suggests it, because what other Indian steel would there be that comes in an ingot?
Right.
That out
Yeah.
that Alexander the Great would accept only 30 of as being important.
His payment. Right.
Right. Yeah. So, and then to me also, like, when you look at ancient iron production, you are, to make ancient iron, you have to layer it. There's no other way. Like,
Yeah.
you get the spongy bloom ingot, and you have to fold it and conglomerate it. And in ancient Assyria, they used iron ingots as currency.
Mm.
And these iron ingots were formed in such a way to show their refinement as material. So they were these kind of like triangular things, and
Oh,
it had a hole punched through it, and then one triangle had a super fine point, and then the other end of the triangle had a fanned out, super thin fanned out section to show that you could take this material and make it into a fine point. You could punch holes through it, and you could fan it into a really thin piece to show that its level of refinement was extreme. So
interesting.
ancient Assyria is the first iron, like really like a iron bound culture. So they were already knew, obviously, that you had to fold and refine the steel, get do what you would want to do, or the iron to make it do what you would want it to do. So
Yeah.
you have a culture of refinement right at the beginning of mass iron production, and then you have a blank window, maybe until these Ilarapu swords, and
Right.
of about, so you say maybe, I don't know, 1200 years, 1300 years. But if someone had a raw piece of steel and you cut a lemon with it, it would reveal the layering immediately. And then you have to think of like, okay, like how long would it have been, or when in that timeline do we think maybe somebody started to play with the patterns on purpose?
Sure.
Like that's the question. Like when in this 1200 to 1400 year window that we don't have any evidence for, when did they start to take layers and make them into things that were decorative? That's
Right.
that's the big question, because you have forge welding immediately, you have forge welding and layering immediately, and then you have pattern welded, incredible pattern welding 1500 years later, and somewhere in the middle it was developed and we don't know where that was.
Hmm.
And
That's a
then
good question.
Indian steel, crucible steel, who knows? We just have this one kind of contextual document. Unfortunately, there was I learned about this recently. There was it was a Persian city, I think it was called Merv, where almost all of the Near East's iron production was happening, and it
Okay.
was in northern Iran now, and Genghis Khan destroyed it. And
Oh,
apparently, this was like the center of iron production for like a few thousand years.
oh
Uh,
wow.
and yeah, so Genghis Khan sacking it kind of like took that entire history away of what we could have learned about like maybe the beginnings of like either pattern welding or crucible steel production.
Yeah, I didn't
So
know crucible steel went back that far. I thought it only went back to about like the first century AD,
um,
or like
I'm,
or around zero, I guess, quote unquote zero.
yeah. I mean, like we said, the Alexander the Great's evidence is kind of like it's not definitive, but it's kind of like contextually interesting.
Sure.
But and then this other city that was destroyed by Genghis Khan might have been able to like shed some more light on that if it still existed today, but it doesn't.
And
So
and Genghis Khan was around in what, like the 12th century?
yeah, I think it was like 1230 or something like that, somewhere around there was when he was making the world his bitch.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever listened to the hardcore history about Genghis Khan?
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's so good. It's
Like
100% worth the, like, whatever, 10 or 12 hours of
something like
podcasting.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so good.
I like yeah, the his like whole story is really ridiculous, like how he came to power and like how he
Sure.
conglomerated the nation and how he like decided he was going to wage war. I mean, obviously there's like not to glorify the deaths of millions and millions, but he had a kind of some really interesting ideas about how to run things that are quite were quite modern. um,
Mhm.
uh, like um, like never, like he didn't demand anybody like change their religion or anything like that. Like
Sure.
everyone just became vassal states and paid taxes if you were conquered without a fight.
Right.
But then he did some real spiteful shit that really fucked the world up. Like I think Baghdad got sacked because the guy who was in charge of Baghdad said, like, well, Genghis Khan is dead, so you're just his son. Like, what do I owe you? And his grandson said, oh, really? How about everything? And basically sacked Baghdad, which at the time was the like the place of knowledge and like philosophical thinking of the Muslim world, like scientific and philosophical thinking of the
Oh,
Muslim world
wow.
was Baghdad. And he sacked every Muslim part of the city and left every Christian part of the city untouched, including the libraries and things like that. So he just torched and killed everybody who was a Muslim and razed and then left everything that was Christian or Jewish alone just to make a point.
Oh, wow. That's
And,
pretty brutal.
yeah. Like, I can't remember what the book was. It might have been Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. I think he points at Genghis Khan as like possibly giving the West the opportunity to become the imperial people of the world because Genghis Khan set the Middle East so far back that medieval Europe was able to like catch up.
Interesting. Right. Right, because when Europe was in the the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, whatever, that's when the Middle East was kind of took the reins and ran with science and
Like,
mathematics and astronomy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then old Genghis Khan came and shut that all down.
Somebody should have been acting cute.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to pull up one of your folders. So cool. Really unique piece. Is it a lockback?
It's a liner lock.
It is a liner lock. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fuller, the steps, the texture, like there's a lot of interesting depth and lines in this piece.
Yeah, the idea there was because, I was talking about these weapons not really having like a place in the world anymore, that I wanted like kind of like a sword form that I could put in my pocket. So it's kind of based off of like a Turkish saber, in its like kind of general form. And then I wanted it like a lot of those pieces are adorned with this gold, like in Kafgari work. But I wanted it to look like it had like the wear of hand use. So it was kind of like it's like worn away everywhere where you would touch it.
Right.
And so it would kind of like have this semblance of that same kind of idea of that like noble sword, family sword kind of thing.
That's very cool. Yeah, I really like your aesthetic, your eye for lines, and your creativity because it manifests in a lot of ways that I wouldn't. I know I would never have thought. And I think that's what's great about this craft or this outlet is that it is a medium through which people can really express a lot of really unique concepts and ideas and creativity. And I definitely see that and appreciate that about your work.
Thank you. I think it's interesting. It's knife making is kind of room for everybody, which is fun. There's not many mediums that have that kind of diversity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, we've been at it for almost 3 hours now.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
We did pretty good. We do have a question from the chat right here.
Okay.
AMO Bladesmithing, who's our Ben Butcher, one of our super sponsors. He says, "Are there any particular things from the world at large that you've drawn inspiration from or been influenced by when creating patterns?"
Um, I like Murano glass is really interesting to look at in terms of it's like
Sure.
it's almost the exact same idea as pattern welding, and
Yeah.
they do really really weird and interesting stuff. And if you really kind of like delve into that world, you can really kind of like put some ideas in your head on these kind of things.
Right.
It like all translates really directly into steel. You might have to come up with some different kind of tools or ideas to do it, but like it's all like one to
It's pretty cool. My working theory right now is that
one.
some of the inspiration for very early mosaic Damascus patterning, especially on some of those the spathas from
Uh-huh.
ancient Rome, originally got their inspiration from the merino glass or the millefiori.
Yeah.
Um, it's really cool to watch how they make the cane, and then how they
Uh-huh.
chop it up and then like
Right.
incorporate it into the work. I'm
Right.
so unfamiliar with glass that it's pretty mesmerizing to watch the
Right.
glass kind of melt and fuse together, and they just kind of shove it together into a big old blob, and then they
And
eventually make
somehow
something
make
cool
this
out of it.
precision thing at the end. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
They, I have a lot of friends who are glass blowers because the art school, has a glass department and we'd all hang out. And
Yeah.
the but like it's so different. Like, steel is like hard and everything is like very defined. Like, okay, I'm
Sure.
gonna, like I can measure things in the micrometer. Uh, and glass is just like it's all intuition. Everything is intuition and muscle memory,
Oh,
and I
wow.
just like it's like so. It's such an alien way of working to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. All right, sir. Well, thank you so much. Where so everybody can find you. Your Tempest Craft actually on Instagram, right?
Yes.
What's the inspiration for Tempest? Real quick.
Um, to be honest, I just thought it sounded cool in like 2010. Like,
Okay.
and I've had it for a long time. I don't know. I just wanted something that was like, my name's Tom. I wanted to start with a T. I got obsessed with like having a cool workshop name at some point in time, and I was just like maybe this would be a good brand. This seems like a cool brand. And then I Googled it at the time. There wasn't really anything like it, so I went with it. But I do like it. It's nice. It's kind of
And, and you read. I know you read a lot of fantasy stuff. Is a
yeah.
Tempest kind of like a magician of sorts?
It's like a storm. It's like a
Oh,
really
okay.
powerful storm. So like I don't know.
Interesting.
I thought that sounded fun. Lightning and thunder and shit. I
Yeah.
like that.
Vikings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
thank you again for being here and joining the conversation. Thank you for being, such a talented and creative person whose work
Uh,
is endlessly inspiring. I love going back and looking at it,
Thank you so
and
much.
checking it out, and just you're like I said, your work has been an inspiration for a long time. And I appreciate you being part of the calendar and part of the podcast, and hopefully people got some little nooks and crannies of gold hidden in our
Mhm.
conversation about our approach and how
I
to
hope so
kind of
too.
how to think about design and stuff like that. So, all
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
everybody, thank you so much.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thank you for having me as well. I
yeah,
really appreciate
absolutely.
it.
No, the pleasure is mine. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.